So, at the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely or switched to airplane, safe or flight mode depending on their device. It's not sufficient to just put your phones on silent mode, as this will maintain a level of interference with the broadcasting system. Item 6 is on affordable housing, and I would like to welcome to today's meeting Mr Paul O'Neill, Mr Gerard Callanan from the National Development Finance Agency, and from the Housing Agency Mr Jim Bainham, Mr Darragh M'Carthy and Ms Katrina Lawler. Before we begin, members, just a note on privilege. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 172I of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to so do, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entity by name or in such a way to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on Mr O'Neill to make his opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I am Head of Financial Advisory at the National Development Finance Agency, and I am responsible for the NDFA's financial advisory roles in the housing sector. I am joined by my senior colleague Gerard Callanan, Deputy Director, NDFA. To assist the committee in its discussion on the topic of affordable housing, I welcome the opportunity to address your questions and give you clarity on the nature of the NDFA's role in the schemes currently underway. The NDFA is providing financial advice to a number of local authorities seeking to develop housing schemes on their lands. The NDFA's role is twofold: to undertake financial modelling in respect of potential schemes. This work is undertaken pre-procurement to assist each local authority in determining tenure mix options for the sites in question, and to provide financial advice during the procurement phase. This entails providing advice on the tender documentation and development agreement contracts, undertaking financial robustness assessments, and performing the financial evaluation of submitted tenders. In relation to affordable housing specifically, the NDFA is assisting Dublin City Council and Fingal County Council on a number of schemes underway. These are O'Devney Gardens in Dublin 7, where final tenders have been received, with 20% proposed for affordable purchase. Oscar Traynor Road in Coolock, where dialogue with shortlisted candidates has commenced, again with 20% proposed for affordable purchase. St Michael's Estate in Dublin 8, where outline design is underway, with 70% proposed for affordable rental. And Ballymastone, Donabate, County Dublin, where dialogue with shortlisted candidates has commenced, with 20% proposed for affordable purchase. I must point out that all policy matters relating to affordable housing fall under the remit of the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government. The NDFA has no role in determining affordable housing policy. Our objective is to assist as many local authorities as possible in support of housing delivery across the country. In relation to affordable housing, this is taking the form of affordable purchase and affordable rental. I trust this clarifies the extent of the NDFA's involvement in affordable housing to date, and we look forward to assisting the committee this morning.
Mr O'Neill, I'd now like to call on Mr Bainham for his opening statement from the Housing Agency.
Chair, members of the committee, we are pleased to be here this morning to assist the committee in its examination of the issues facing us in relation to affordable housing. I'm accompanied by my colleagues Darragh McCarthy, Researcher, and Katrina Lawler, Senior Staff Officer. The agency's vision is to promote the building of sustainable communities. Critical to this is that everybody is able to live in a good quality and affordable house. This morning I intend to focus on two areas relating to affordable housing: affordable purchase housing and cost rental housing. In relation to affordable purchase housing, it is widely recognised that there is a need to address housing affordability issues faced by low to middle income households, particularly in Dublin and other main urban areas. As a general rule, housing costs should be below 1/3 of a household's income and long term below 1/4 of its income. Households on very low income may require social housing or other supports to meet their needs. Other households with higher incomes have adequate means to meet to purchase or rent at market prices. The new affordable housing purchase scheme aims to target lower to moderate income households who are living in areas of the country with housing affordability issues are greatest. The scheme lowers the initial purchase cost of a home, making it more achievable for low to moderate income households to access home ownership. The new scheme follows the commencement of Part 5 of the Housing Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2009. The first set of regulations under this legislation was commenced in March, allowing local authorities to establish a scheme of priority under Section 85 of the Act. An important feature of the new scheme is that the discount offered to purchases, which can be up to 40% of market value, will be retained by the local authority as equity in the property. When this equity is repaid, the monies can be used to provide more affordable housing. While local authorities' stake in a home must be repaid in full, households will have a large degree of choice about the timing of these repayments. I'll then move on to cost rental. Cost rental and the Vienna model has been the subject of a lot of discussion recently. It is a model of rented housing where the rents charged are linked to the cost of delivering, managing and maintaining the properties. This differs from private renting, where rents are set by the market, which may lead to high rents in high demand areas. In cost rental, rents are not driven by market demand, are more stable over time. This is expected to result in rents that are more affordable for lower to moderate income households. It's also different to social housing, where the rents paid by these households is linked to their income. Cost rental has the potential to deliver secure and more affordable rental accommodation for lower to moderate income households. And over the longer term, as cost rental homes are delivered at scale, cost rental is likely to have a stabilising effect on the broader private rented market. In terms of the importance of affordable rental accommodation, one of the primary aims of the National Planning Framework under Project Ireland 2040 is to encourage compact growth in our towns and cities. Up to 40% of future housing development is to be built within or close to built-up areas using infill sites, brownfield or publicly owned lands. The housing densities need to be increased to make public transport and other infrastructure more viable, reduce urban sprawl and make our communities more sustainable. Building affordable, secure and well-planned rental accommodation is critical to achieving these goals. Households can be offered a choice to live in secure, affordable accommodation within walking distance of local amenities and with access to good public transport. In recent years, more households are renting and are doing so for longer, either by choice or because they cannot afford to buy or have yet to find a home that they can purchase. Cost rental can be an attractive form of tenure for these households. A steady support of secure, affordable accommodation is also a key element underpinning our economic competitiveness. In terms of affordability, there are a number of essential elements which must be put in place to ensure that cost rental housing is affordable. These include provision of land at no or low cost, design of good quality housing to achieve reasonable delivery cost with long-term maintenance in mind, state contribution to development costs and removal of infrastructural constraints, and there's a current site services fund to do that, and the availability of low-cost stable finance which is paid back over a long period of time, often more than 40 years. I'll talk now about the Enniskerry Road pilot cost rental project. This project is a result of a collaboration between Dunleary Down County Council, the Housing Agency, Respond and TUA Housing Associations and the Housing Finance Agency. Financial support has also been provided through the Department of Housing Planning and Local Government. The project includes 50 cost rental homes and 105 social homes and a community centre and green spaces at Enniskerry Road, Stepaside, Dublin 18. The site is near to a wide range of amenities, public transport, public facilities, schools, health services and local communities and sports groups. Cost rental homes are being funded through the provision of grant funding for site infrastructure under the Service Site Fund and long-term loan facility using competitive European Investment Bank rates lent through the Housing Finance Agency. The land itself was provided by the Housing Agency at no cost. Following completion of the development, which is expected in late 2021, tenants will be paying €1,200 per month to live in a two-bedroom home. The rent is based on the cost of delivery and maintaining these homes and is significantly below market rent for similar homes in the area. The objective would be to reduce the rental cost closer to or below €1,000 per home in future developments. In addition, the homes must remain in cost rental use for at least 70 years to help ensure that the value of the state's investment is passed on to future tenants. The Housing Agency is also providing 3 additional sites for development to the Land Development Agency and is setting specific requirements for the provision of long-term cost rental housing on these sites. The first 2 of these will be in Skerries in Dublin and in Naas in County Kildare. In both cases, delivery will be for the development of approximately 200 homes, which will be a mix of social housing and cost rental housing. In conclusion, these projects will provide valuable lessons for development of a national cost rental sector in Ireland and will help to determine what structure and support should be put in place at the outset of these projects to achieve cost rental housing that is affordable to a wide range of households. We need to learn from these early projects and adopt a long-term approach to cost rental. Chair, there's a lot more information we could provide on affordable housing, and we are happy to answer any questions which the members might have or to provide further details as required.
Thank you, Mr. Raynham. So our first question is Deputy O'Brien, and we might just, when you're asking questions, who it's being directed to is what we normally do, and hopefully then we'll get a couple of rounds of questions in. Deputy O'Brien.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentations. I think what a number of us in the committee are looking for today, I suppose, is to get into the detail of the projects, both from the Housing Agency point of view and Enniskerry Road that's been developed at the minute, and also without straying into policy areas to try and get a handle on some of the kind of the financial modelling that the NDFA has been advising on. So maybe just to go through a couple of technical questions. The key to all of this, of course, is how we make, whether it's the purchase of the rental units, genuinely affordable. And part of our difficulty is there isn't a clear definition of what we mean by affordable that's agreed by all actors. So, okay, we should relatively soon have the affordable housing schemes for the purchase agreed by the local authorities. That hasn't happened yet, but we've no scheme yet in terms of the affordable or cost rental to know what affordability is defined as. So that's a bit of a movable feast. But to go through the questions. First of all, to the Housing Agency, one of my concerns about Enniskerry Road is the entry-level rents aren't affordable for a large cohort of the people for whom this kind of housing is targeted. So if the purpose of affordable cost rental is for people above the thresholds of eligibility for social housing, but priced out of the market, €1,200 is a high rent. Now, it might seem not as high as the very excessive rents, but it is a very high rent, and any household earning 45,000, 55,000 will be paying well above a third of their net disposable income if that's the rental charge that they're being charged. So there is a problem in that. I'm not looking you to argue for or against it. I'd like to understand how that figure is derived at in terms of the financial modelling. So clearly loans have to be paid down, but as you said yourself, in other European countries they pay the loans down over 40 years or longer. I'm assuming here the loan is going to be paid down over a shorter period of time, and that's one of the reasons why the entry-level rent is set so high. But also, can you tell us, are there other costs that are mixed up in this? So, for example, if Dún Laoghaire Down added additional costs, for example, for works already completed in relation to that site, or is this just the loan financing and the management maintenance, or are there other costs that are pushing up the entry-level rents at the start? What I'm interested from the NDFA, and this is, again, a purely hypothetical question, not straying into policy, but if, for example, we were trying to look at a model that would have entry-level rents at, for example, €700 to €900, which would be within the Housing Agency's own definition for that cohort of people 45 to 55, 65,000 household income. How would you model that? So would it just be a longer loan term? Would it be mixing, for example, EIB loans with soft loans from the state? Would you be looking at an upfront state capital contribution? What are the options, without you stating any preference for any of those, to give us a read and all of that? And again, from the Housing Agency's point of view, I suppose, clearly there's a service sites fund. Is that fund going to be accessed in relation to Enniskerry Road to try and bring down the cost? Clearly, if there was a capital advance loan facility type loan available, for example, to the approved housing bodies as there is with social housing, that could deal with the loan time. Have those options been discussed with the department, and has been any progress on those? In relation to the affordable purchase and the service sites fund, can you explain just your understanding of how the equity stake is going to work? So is it a set kind of equity stake of 40 or 50,000 euros, or is it going to be index linked to inflation or some other factor? Because there's a lack of clarity on that elsewhere. Again, for the Housing Agency densities, can you give us an indication of what you mean? I'm broadly supportive of your proposition and that bit of the National Development Plan, planning framework, but so people understand, for example, in a Dún Laoghaire or in a Dublin city, on the kinds of sites, what densities are we moving from and what densities are we moving to? And then finally, land. Why 70 years? Why have a length of time at all? I like the covenant idea. I think it's the right way to go. I just don't understand why you'd set a time limit on it, because given that this is a public asset, I would have thought it would be indefinite or open to regular review. So again, if you can maybe explain the logic of that, that'd be helpful.
Thanks, Owen. I'll go to yourself first, Paul.
Definitely in terms of the modelling that we've been looking at to date, you're right, it's looking at different options and levers that are available to the state to make the rents in this case as affordable as possible. So when we were, take St Michael's for example, is the one we were looking at long dated loans, maybe a portion of those loans being interest only, for example. And it's really by looking at the levers, what levers are available to the state to make the product as affordable as possible, without looking at the private market and obviously the additional equity requirements and returns, etc., that they bring with them. So it's looking at it from the state's point of view and how we can potentially deliver this model. We haven't modelled a subsidy in what we've done to date, or an upfront contribution, but you're right, that would obviously contribute towards a reduction in the rents as well. And obviously maybe the Site Services Fund is the example you mentioned in that respect potentially as well.
Just one very quick supplementary. So for example, if government wanted to bring the rents down to say 700 to 900 euros, which is equivalent to cost rental projects in other European capitals, I presume that is financially possible even without a subsidy, by stretching the loan over a longer period, or mixing an EIB loan with some kind of soft loan from the state, or those things are possible.
Yes, they are possible. I suppose the one condition is without going through a procurement process to know what the construction costs are, which is an issue as well, and the requirements in that respect, in terms of apartments, the numbers to the core and basement car parking, etc., because that obviously does have a driver, and obviously in terms of the cost then that has an impact on the funding requirement that's needed for the project as well.
Jim?
Okay, there was a number of different elements of Owen's question there, so I'll try and hopefully I'll cover them all as best I can. I think the initial question was in relation to the 1200 rent and how that was arrived at. I suppose starting off at the beginning, there was a scheme that of 155 dwellings which was designed for that site. The site itself is on, it's a sloping site on the side of Ticknock Hill there, or Tree Rock Hill in the Dublin Hills. So the site itself has some issues in relation to how it would be developed. It also is quite a rocky site. The genesis of that scheme in terms of design goes back to the planning is Part 8 planning, which was granted in 2007. So there's inclusion of car parking, including underground car parking, which if you were maybe starting with a clean sheet of paper, you mightn't necessarily have included, but it was included in the scheme, and there was certain costs associated with that. In terms of the overall scheme, the cost of the tender, including VAT, is 45 million euros, so it's a significant cost. And on the way to that, there was a process with Oireachtas Down where certain costs were actually stripped out. There was other costs which were pared back, which I understand some of those things are Oireachtas going to bear themselves. But the basic, the scheme itself, it has, I suppose, certain challenges because of the nature of it. And unfortunately, there's also a small issue with Japanese knotweed in terms of getting rid of that and various other bits and pieces. So the cost of the scheme, it has to be paid down and it has to be funded over a long period of time. One of the questions that you were asking was whether the loans had to be paid down over a short period of time. Actually, the loan period, and it's unique in terms of its loan period with the HFA in this context, is 40 years. So, and that has been a significant element in keeping costs down. So the cost per unit is quite high in that scheme, and even allowing for the fact that we've been able to access service side funding, because that's another element, I think, another question, or part of your question. The service side fund is being allocated to the scheme, and Oireachtas Down were successful in getting an allocation of 4 million of exchequer funding towards that. taking that into account and just looking at the 50 units that are course rental units, because it's only eligible for the affordable element of it, the cost per home or per apartment is still around €260,000. So it's there are apartments by their nature are expensive. It's on a site that has its own issues, and they have to be managed over a long period of time. In terms of the cost modelling, a little bit of cost modelling, I don't want to step on the NFA's toes a little bit, but the long-term maintenance and keeping those apartments in very well maintained condition has been included in the modelling for that. So at periodic time periods throughout the 40-year model, it has been allowed that significant works will be undertaken to upgrade the property. So that's included in the rent. So I think ignoring something like that could lead to problems down the line, but that wasn't ignored. And in terms of, I suppose, the operational cost of the approved housing bodies involved, then they looked at their costs and they reduced them a little bit as well. They took about 25% off their normal operational costs. Again, it's an area that's a little unknown for them because they have not managed cost of rental housing per se in the past. So there was a number of different aspects to it in terms of trying to bring the cost down. But the three main elements in trying to bring costs, which came down from quite a sizable capital side with the cost of the delivering of the units, is the service side fund, which is 4 million over the 50 units. The 40-year cost of finance being delivered by the HFA, and the economies that were, I suppose, delivered in discussions with the AHBs and trying to pare back various different costs that they had. Although it would be nice to have a lower cost, it was quite a lot of work went into getting it down to 1,200. Now, moving on to other elements there, in terms of using a CAF-like loan for cost rental, that it has been discussed, and there has been interaction with the department on that as a possibility. And I think the agency first paper in relation to that as a possibility goes back to 2015. But there's been various iterations of kind of either cost or affordable rental over the last number of years. At the moment, the tool that can be used to I suppose, reduce costs is the service side fund. That's the one that's been proposed at the moment. I think the next question was in relation to clarity on the equity charge in the affordable purchase scheme. I suppose try and explain it simply. If the equity at the outset is 25%, and that's say €70,000 in terms of the price reduction today, it stays 25%. So as costs go up, it's indexed to, I suppose, the market prices rather than inflation per se. So if the price of that house in 10 years' time has gone up by €100,000, the equity stake has gone up by €25,000. So basically, that's the way it works. You had a question on densities. Now, I'm not a planner, so I'm not the most competent person to talk about densities. But just in looking, I did a few quick calculations in relation to Enniskerry Road. The density there is about 55 per hectare. 55 per hectare and about 22 per acre.
55 what?
Dwellings.
Yeah.
So it's roughly a 7-acre site. And I think if post NPF, whatever, we'd probably be looking to increase that from that level on a site like that. In terms of the 70 years, that the restrictive use covenant has been put into the deed of transfer, there was a lot of back and forth in relation to the legal transfer of the site. It was quite complicated for various reasons. And it might be a great answer, Owen, but it ended up at 70. In hindsight, I think we would like it to be longer. The main lease that's currently in effect with the two approved housing bodies is a 150-year lease, and I think in future I think we'd link the two of them and have a longer covenant in terms of use. I think I've covered most elements of that.
Thank you, Jim. Darragh.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your presentations. I just think I'll just stay on the rental piece first before I move to the affordable purchase. And I suppose from both of the presentations here today, we're talking about getting a pilot project up and running, which was announced in 2015. So I think we need to put that in context, that if we're going to actually really deliver cost rental in real terms that will make a significant difference to people in Ireland, we certainly can't do it at the pace that we're doing it at the moment. When I look at rents, we look at the DAFT report on rent affordability and why this is so crucial, particularly in Dublin, but not just Dublin, it's all over the country. I'm sure both your agencies will be well aware of where rents are at. But in relation to rent affordability versus purchasing, like in areas like Walkinstown, Crumlin and Drimna, the average rent is now about $1,427 per month. To purchase a home, if one were able to get a mortgage for the same value of a home, it's about €710 per month. So you're looking at a difference of just over 100%. And that's how broken the rental market is. And that'll bring me back to affordable purchase in a moment, because why I believe a big part of resolving this will be allowing people to be able to buy their homes. And Jim, I'll come back to you specifically around the criteria and the affordable purchase scheme, because that scheme itself hasn't been fully agreed, so I'd be interested to get your take on it. Just from the NDFA, in the four schemes that you're assisting the local authorities on, O'Devany, Oscar Traynor, St Michael's and Ballymastone, have you concluded your financial model and your work on that with the local authorities now? I know they're engaging now in a tender stage, so you're happy that your financial model is completed, or is it open to further change? And I ask that in the context just in your presentation. If I take Ballymastone in particular, you've mentioned 20% proposed for affordable purchase. My understanding there's 20% social housing in that scheme as well. That's just not mentioned in that, so you might clarify. Also, in all of the schemes that are there, and this is a government model, one that my party don't agree with, is that we're looking at selling the remainder of that land effectively, and looking at, if you take Ballymastone, 60% will be private. If you take St Michael's Estate, 70% for proposed affordable rental. So the remainder of that, if I take Oscar Traynor, which has been a long time on the go now at this stage, 20% for affordable purchase, what's happening with the rest of it, and what does your financial model allow that to do? Can I ask about your interaction with the Land Development Agency? That's for both of you, with the LDA that isn't actually set up on a statutory footing as of yet, that we're still awaiting the legislation to see how that agency will actually operate. And I know, Jim, that you've mentioned specifically in the area of Naas and Skerries in Dublin, that's effectively additional sites for development to the Land Development Agency. What are they telling you that they want to do with those two sites? I've mentioned here cost rental housing. Is that cost rental housing for delivery based on the Enniskerry Road pilot? My question is, are we going to wait to see how the pilot runs or gets up and running in Enniskerry Road to then start delivering the other cost rental, and specifically as well with St Michael's Estate? I think when you look at rents of €1,200, and I understand you've answered that question earlier on, that it'll effectively, the rent that can be charged is just below market rate. It's not a whole heap below market rate in many of these areas if you look at the Q4 DAFT report. So if we're delivering rents and cost rental at €1,200 per month, whilst it is welcome that it's less than the market rent, in a lot of areas it's not significantly less at all. You know, particularly in the areas where it's been built. So maybe the model in relation to the term of the loan, the term of the subvention needs to be looked at there. On the affordable purchase scheme, like, I'm just wondering about in your own agencies, with the housing agency in particular, when do you see the first affordable house actually being delivered? And this is a matter of great frustration for me. I don't want you to stray into a policy area, but negotiations around the increase to the service site fund to 310 million took over 3 years took a lot of time, and that was not just to allow reduction in cost, but was to establish the scheme. So I know the 4 Dublin local authorities have accepted and have approved some broad criteria around that scheme. But are you happy, Jim, that the scheme is clear enough for you that you're able to cost it properly? My final question around the affordable housing for the moment is the income threshold, and particularly the income threshold for couples. Flagged this before of it being set at €75,000, which is a good combined wage, but in many instances 2 people with decent jobs are going to be above that threshold. They find themselves in a situation whereby they're paying on average in Dublin about 40% of their net take-home pay in rent, if they're lucky enough to be able to rent. A single person in Dublin right now, based on the average income, is actually paying about 58.8% of their, and that's based on the DAFT report of the last quarter. That doesn't take into account the recent increases. Nearly 60% of their net take-home pay is in rent. So that's why I think it's really important that we give people other options around affordable rental, but particularly around affordable purchase. But if we're going to say to people above 75,000, we 50,000 as the threshold for an individual, I think that's fair. But 75,000 for a couple, I think, will knock a lot of people out of an affordable purchase scheme. It is, I know, I'm told by the department that it's a matter that's under review by the Department of Finance at the moment. Would you be able to advise me as to where you believe that's at the moment? And is there a willingness to move above the €75,000 threshold, even allowing for regional affordability, like is what's allowed in HAP, which I'll turn to in a minute as well, where there's discretion allowed at a local authority level on the basis of the income level in that area, but also of the purchase price in that area. The affordable housing scheme that we have worked on and that previously worked would allow an equity stake, where you should be looking at to be able to sell houses for around €210,000, for between 160 and 210, but mainly about 210, 220, 230. So I'm wondering if you could update me as to when you see the actual establishment of that scheme across the country, but particularly in areas where we have affordability issues like Dublin, Cork, Galway, Waterford, and that's growing right across the country. Thanks.
I'll go to you first, Jim.
Right. Again, there's a range of different elements of that. Just in terms of I think your first comment about the pace in relation to Enniskerry Road, it did take a long time, and I think it would have been quicker, and I don't think the aspiration for other schemes in relation to delivery of cost rental, and you mentioned it in relation to the local land development agency sites. It's not the intention that everything stops and waits for results from Enniskerry Road. That's not the intention. Because even at that, how long do you wait after it's operational? So you need to press on, and that's definitely the aspiration of the Land Development Agency and the Housing Agency. Your more general point in relation to affordability and rent and mortgage, in many parts of certainly of Dublin, renting is potentially more expensive than obtaining a 9%
more expensive.
Well,
so
I suppose
significantly
it varies.
more expensive.
It varies in
but that'll be an average across Dublin.
Yeah. The going on then, just in relation to the interaction with the Land Development Agency, there's at least 3 sites that are going to be transferred to the Land Development Agency by the Housing Agency. One in Enniskerry, one in Skerries, one in Naas, in a place called Devoy Park in Naas, very close to the local authority offices, and another one in Balbriggan. That's quite a large site actually, and more complicated in terms of planning. In terms of the interaction we've had extensive interaction with the Land Development Agency, and there's I suppose a good level of kind of shared vision in terms of trying to develop those sites. And the 2 I mentioned, which are the one in Skerries and the one in the Void Park there in Naas. They're both kind of manageable size. They're both around 200 dwellings, and they'd be a mix of social and cost rental. So both of those sites would be, I suppose, retained in some form of state ownership going into the future. In terms of the level of how the transfer will be done, it's intended that the transfer from the agency will include various covenants which will place restrictions on how that will be developed into the future.
I suppose my question, I didn't probably, just to clarify, didn't probably put it well enough, is that in the absence of legislation governing the Land Development Agency, like, are effectively those transfers done, in principle? Like, what's your interaction, or have they physically transferred over?
They haven't physically transferred.
So, and they can't physically transfer over until
there's a legal entity.
Yes, and there's no legal entity at the moment with the Land Development Agency.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what I'm trying to get to, because we're talking about transferring of land and responsibility to an entity that has no legal authority right now. That's not your fault, but I'm just saying that's effectively the position. So we have a housing agency that's in discussions with an entity that was set up in skeletal form by the government that is not a legal entity.
I think that's correct. That's my understanding. But
would that not be a concern?
Well, I suppose there's precedent for it. I mean, when the housing agency was set up itself, it didn't have a legal form for a period of time, but it was set up. So we went down a very similar route ourselves. And we've been assisting the LDA in terms of some of the stuff they've done with corporate.
I suppose, would it be a concern about delivering on those sites where you guys could be going ahead doing it? Or the local authorities, certainly I know in Skerries, were pretty much ready they'd master planned it. And now we're kind of stopped in one sense because, the LDA isn't a legal entity and doesn't have legislation governing it.
Well, as I understand, that should be dealt with, in the next number of months. Now, obviously, that's subject to things happening in it all or whatever. But anyway, leaving that to one side.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted.
We are. Like, the land hasn't transferred. It will transfer with conditions and constraints on it.
Okay. And
even from the LDA's perspective, because they'll have to operate on a commercial basis, they welcome those constraints, as it'll kind of make the more commercially simpler transaction. Moving on then to the affordable purchase scheme. Again, I suppose the scheme is based on the 2009 Act, so it was enacted by Oireachtas about 10 years ago. I suppose for a period of time it wasn't enacted because it was felt it was maybe not so much of an affordability issue during the recession. It's been enacted more recently, and in terms of the regulations that are out there at the moment, they're not a complete set of regulations. Now, the Minister, I believe, a couple of weeks ago at this committee undertook to make the remaining regulations available by the autumn of this year. So I'm just trying to go back.
I suppose the purpose of that question was because the 4 Dublin local authorities, in principle, have adopted the broad criteria of a scheme because they all want to have an affordable purchase scheme in their areas. But because the scheme isn't concluded, does it make it difficult? And that's what I asked to actually cost it, because you don't actually have a final scheme. So from Paul's perspective, like when you talk about Ballymastone and places like that, that's why I asked about the financial model. Is it concluded? Because the scheme isn't concluded. So.
Yeah, well, jump in. So at the moment, yes, we're in the procurement phase on all those projects. So the modelling generally feeds in before you get to the procurement phase as to what tenure mix each local authority decides to go with. But you're right in terms of then the affordable, how that will look like when you go through the procurement stage. And really, the way we structure the competitions and help the local authorities is to make be it the social or affordable costs as keen as possible, and that's how we're structuring the competitions in terms of the evaluation that we undertake. And then local authorities are also taking different views as to how, in terms of affordable, whether it's a cost that's bid in by developers or whether those prices are actually set by local authorities. So there's differing considerations being given in that respect.
So in the absence of the final model of affordable purchase, each local authority is kind of deciding themselves what they deem to be the affordable model for these schemes.
Yes, I think that's certainly
probably not ideal, though.
No.
I might just There was other queries I had just in relation to income limits. You mentioned €75,000 for a couple. Now, there was discussion of that being an income limit. It's actually, it hasn't been enacted. It's not in regulations.
Okay.
So the legislation is more, I suppose, flexible in relation to the way it describes how income limits would be calculated, and there's a degree of complexity in it. And I might ask Darragh to explain a little bit about it, because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Okay.
That's the way it's described in the legislation. No, obviously it has to be enacted in terms of the regulations. But anyway, Darragh might describe it a little bit.
Yeah. So what Section 84 of the Part 5 of the 2009 Act articulates an actual affordability standard. So it talks about mortgage payments not consuming more than 35% of the net annual household income. It also actually outlines what this notional mortgage payment would look like. So it will be a 90% loan to value, and it would be based on the average purchase price that a first-time buyer would pay in an administrative area. So actually that's the flexibility element that I think Jim is referring to, and it doesn't actually lend itself to strict national income limits.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So, obviously the regulations have yet to be drafted or finalised anyway. What we expect, based on what's in the legislation, is that the limit in Down will not be the same as the limit in Roscommon. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Victor.
Okay, thank you for the presentations. I'm going to be sort of brief and concise. Firstly, I want to thank Mr. O'Neill for his very concise 3-page report. I think it's one of the shortest we've ever had and the most concise, so I want to thank you for that. You mentioned your experience of working with Dublin City Council and Fingal County Council. Now, you don't mention South Dublin County Council or Dunleary Rathdown County Council, so you might just tell us, have you been involved with them? Are you doing any work with them? Or maybe it's optional, maybe they don't require your assistance. I don't know how it works, but how you interface, you might touch on that. To go back to the theme that Senator O'Brien was talking about, is this no legal entity of the Land Development Agency. And we know that the government have indicated in the past that they require about at least sort of 30% of land released from central controlled bodies would be utilised for affordable housing. They also state that in addition to this, we'll have the 10% Part 5, so that brings it up, and that it could be even further increased through cooperation with the landowners. So you might just, I think that's really an important point that the Senator has touched on, the importance of this Land Development Agency, its relationship with all other bodies, including local authorities, because this is clearly critical now. There is a suggestion that the Land Development Agency legislation will be coming through the Houses very shortly, and that has to be welcomed. It's really, really important. There was a great fanfare and press release by the government when they launched the Land Development Agency about this 1.225 billion, which was going to develop very quickly, 150,000 new homes. And that was great excitement, and this all happened, of course, in September 2018, and progress is slow. So I just want to send that out as a broader message to people in the House. But back to the issue then in relation to, just to go back here again to Jim, you talk about the land, for instance, in Enniskerry was provided to the housing agency at no cost, but there was a cost there, and it's a very substantial cost. Are you aware, or would you be aware, or could you tell the committee the cost of this land initially? Because to suggest in a one-line throwaway remark that this land, was given to the housing agency at no cost, that's correct, but it cost somebody. And when you talk about the unit costs for these units, we must bear in mind the overall cost of the site. Yes, there were constraints. Yes, I acknowledge that you did a lot of work. Yes, all people involved pared back the cost. It was substantial paring back, and that fed into the delays. But I welcome the principle that we're going to now see units there. But you might just talk about the acquisition costs and reaffirm or retell us again the cost then of each of the residential units per se, because I think that's important. In relation then to this development in Skerries and in Dublin and in Devoy Park out there in Naas, again it goes back to the thing about the role and the function of the Land Development Agency or other state interests, because this ultimately will determine this outcome, this outputs, like this 30% that I talked about, like the additional Part 5, 10%, like the additional units that will come available through cooperation of the landowners. So that's all critical. On one hand, the government have major land banks and resources. They're belonging to the state, and we need to maximise the potential in terms of affordability and social. And yes, the Land Development Agency have a commercial remit, and we have to be realistic about that. And yes, it is envisaged that they will have a mixed, I think everyone welcomes mixed tenure and mixed housing. I think that's important for a whole range of issues. But we need a lot more clarity here. So you might just, again, elaborate on your relationships with the Land Development Agency. And again, because what's really important, you've told us here today that you are going to, you've agreed to provide these sites, these 3 sites, as I said, in Skerries, in Dublin, in Kildare. And what conditions? You talked then, you were setting specific requirements for the provision of long-term cost rental on these. So can you tell us what conditions you're setting out there? Like, elaborate a bit more on them. And how can you be sure that they're going to be enforced and adhered to? And then tell us that in the context of what is government policy in relation to the use of state lands. Thank you.
I go to yourself, Paul.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Senator. Yeah, just in terms of our role, yes, I mean, our role, we're keen to do is to assist and support as many local authorities as possible. So we are actually supporting more local authorities than what I've set out in the paper. We focus the paper on just purely on the schemes that are underway in terms of from a deliverability point of view. So the 2 you mentioned in Dún Laoghaire, yes, we have done some initial feasibility, viability assessments for the council out there. And in South Dublin, again, yes, in Shangana, we've been advising from a modelling perspective as to what options they could look at for that site. And then in South Dublin, yes, we're the financial advisors to South Dublin County Council on their site as well, the Shankill site.
Shankill is in Dún Laoghaire, sorry, Dún Laoghaire. Shangana, you mean?
Shangana,
sorry, yeah.
Shangana, yeah. Just a couple of points in terms of our other roles. So with the Land Development Agency, again, we've been doing some initial modelling for them on a couple of sites from a cost rental perspective. Jim mentioned Balbriggan and also out in Dundrum as well.
Jim mentioned the Balbriggan. Sorry, I'd ask which Balbriggan site is that, Jim? Sorry to.
It's land called the Castle Lands.
All right.
It's the south of Balbriggan.
Yeah, no. So you're looking to do cost rental on all of that.
Well, yeah.
I just want to
Particular section, yeah.
Can I just come back in relation to Dundrum? Are you referring to the Central Mental Hospital site?
That's correct.
Can you elaborate on what you've done to date there?
Yeah, we've undertaken an assessment. The LDA asked us to look at whether the site would be viable from a cost rental perspective, and we've undertaken some initial modelling for them in that respect.
And what do you think?
Well, clearly with the area and with the rental potential in the area, yes, cost rental is a viable option for that site.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, there's a number of questions for me. Like, in terms of some of the questions about the Land Development Agency, I think that like some of them are, like, I'm not competent to talk about certain elements of it at all. It's more for the Land Development Agency, but I can certainly talk about our interaction with them. But before I go on to that, you did ask about the cost of the land in Enniskerry Road, and you're correct that it does have a value, and it does have a, there is a cost to the state in providing it for zero cost. A recent valuation of it undertaken for our own accounting purposes valued it at around €8 million. So the fact that it's been provided for social and cost rental purposes, no additional cost has been passed on to the project, but effectively it's worth at least €8 million.
The site value?
Yeah. You also talked about the cost of each residential dwelling within that scheme. The overall cost of the scheme, taken in its entirety, is around about I think 53 or 54 million. That includes construction costs of about 46 million, plus there's design team fees, there's contributions to utilities, there's development levies, there's a plethora of other costs that are associated with that, including some construction period costs in terms of finance. So if you divide that out, you get, I think, around about 340,000 per unit in total. or an average, roughly. So there, again, as I was stating earlier on, there, because of the typology of both the site and the dwelling types, they're not the cheapest type of unit or home that can be delivered. So you then went on to ask about how we might deal with the transfer of lands and how we put controls over that. Well, what I suppose Enniskerry Road was a kind of an example of how we could do that, and we'd intend doing something similar. Like in terms of the status of where we are with the LDA, we haven't got a legal document which sets out in detail what the constraint would be. I'll use Naas maybe as an example of what we want as the owner of the land to happen with that. It has capacity for around about 200 units or 200 homes to be developed pretty close to the existing town centre and close to the local authority offices. There isn't actually yet that much in the way of apartments or rental accommodation in the middle of Naas. And what we'd like to do in that site is to have 10% social, as is required by legislation, and have the balance to be cost rental. So it would effectively be entirely a rental development in that land. And again, the long-term ownership of that site would be kept within a state entity going forward. So that's the intention in relation to that. And just, I suppose, from the LDA's point of view, they're receptive to that. They haven't raised objections that I'm aware of in relation to that plan.
Okay, thanks.
That's the last question there, Jim, was it?
I think so.
Okay, Deputy Casey.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be fairly brief. I think most questions have been asked at this stage. Just in relation to Paul, just maybe you can give me some indication of, you say you offered advice to each of the local authorities in basically site assessment or in tenure mix in options. Is there any number of sites where you've failed to come to a financial or come to an arrangement where it's financially viable in any local authorities? And if you could just briefly update me in relation to that. And just maybe your general opinion on the whole procurement process. Is it delivering value for money at the end of the day, or is it delaying us delivering housing? Because I think the procurement process is one of the stumbling blocks in relation to the delivery of housing. So just your general viewpoint of that on that. Just also, I suppose, is a point to be made to both of you, or ask your opinion on, like, the 4 projects we're looking here at are all state land, but yet a significant proportion of these are going to be given to the private sector to deliver housing. Do you think that's correct use of state land? And do you think it's the correct policy? And should we not be able as a state to deliver our housing on our own land? And then, Jim, just in relation to the cost rental, and while we all accept the cost rental is cheaper than market rent, it's still not affordable. And 1,200 is not affordable rent for a 2-bedroomed house. So what measures do we need to take to get it to affordable rent? If market rent is not affordable, cost rental is not affordable either. So what needs to happen? What are the big stumbling blocks in relation to affordability? We can all talk here, I suppose, about red tape, regulations, development levies, utilities. But is the single biggest issue challenging us today land costs and the cost of land moving forward? And what do we need to do? Because I honestly believe until we face up to the issue of land and land costs, we will never get to affordability, whether it's affordable purchase or affordable rent. And what do we need to do in relation to land? Thanks, Chair.
Paul?
In terms of the first place, thank you, Deputy. You mentioned the land cost, but actually I'd add just the construction market and construction costs to that. So in terms of the sites that we're looking at, the sites are viable. It depends on the mix, the tenure mix, and then also the delivery model, be it cost rental or affordable purchase. So to give you an example, in certain things we've looked at, affordable purchase for apartments may not work because of the cost of building. and the requirements that are relating to those, whereas the cost rental model, given the rental yields, may be a more attractive model in that respect. So it's really about just looking at the different options in that respect. From a procurement point of view, you're right, procurement process, they take long, probably take too long. I mean, we see it across all delivery models that we're working on, but you can't avoid them. You know, they're very difficult, but what we try and do is bring our experience in terms of other delivery models to the bear and try and make them as streamlined as possible. But there is set requirements, be it 12, 15, 18 months longer for procurement delivery on these projects, unfortunately. And then from a policy perspective in terms of these sites, so you know, we're advising on various different products and different offerings, where we certainly wouldn't be saying the ones we've mentioned here are a panacea or a way to deliver everything. But what I would say is, yes, there's a private element to these sites, but the state is getting back a contribution for that private piece, which you can use to reinvest. You know, there is a significant social element to these schemes, and definitely I didn't answer that question in terms of the social mix, but it's generally 30% social on these sites as well. The local authorities are also specifying ultimately will be the purchasers of those sites, so it'll be the list of nominees for those as well, which is important. And then also the way the procurements are structured, you know, it's not a case of just the private sector. The private market just runs and develops the private piece as it sees fit. That's I suppose, the benefit of the procurement process. They do have to progress the sites in line with the aspirations and the quality, the technical quality, planning quality, and tenure mix that the local authorities have in mind. So there is that element of control that the local authorities bring throughout the development process.
Jim.
You had a question in relation to land and the passing on of land to the private sector. I think in relation to the sites I discussed there, the two sites that are going to, well, actually Enniskerry Road as well, the Enniskerry Road land is, I suppose, passing ultimately, well, at the moment it's in the ownership of Darragh O'Brien, but the arrangement will pass the ownership on to approved housing bodies, which are regulated social housing providers. So that's an example of the land, I suppose, being managed long term by AHBs. With the other proposals in Enniskerry, in Skerries, keep on mixing those up, in Skerries and in Naas, again, the intention is that the long-term ownership of those lands will be controlled by the state, and they won't be passed on. We've other models, and one of them, I suppose, there's been some interaction with the NDFA, in fact, significant interaction with the NDFA, where there is purchase. Now, these are actually market purchases on a site in Westmeath, but it could be adopted or could be rolled out where there's going to be purchases by affordable purchases, where a developer undertakes the development, but the land is only transferred to the ultimate purchaser, and the developer doesn't actually take possession of the land at all. The person who gets the land after the dwellings have been built is the person who is buying the house. So I think that there's definitely ways that the state can keep control of land into the future and only pass it on to the end user. So that's an operational scheme. Just in terms of getting cost rental more affordable, I suppose I have referred to the fact there's particular constraints in relation to Enniskerry. The other sites, they're more benign sites in terms of their characteristics. So we would be optimistic that we could achieve better results in relation to that. Just to explain a little bit about the land that we are using, it's land aggregation scheme land. So the state did pay for that land, and in passing the land on at no cost, the state is effectively providing a subsidy, and that's the case with Enniskerry. That would also be the case in relation to the other sites I talked about. And if land is being passed on, say for instance in relation to the bigger development in Balbriggan, where it might be appropriate because it's such a large site, that there might be some private purchase land there, that there would be a price to the land in a situation like that, or if there was a commercial element to it, because again it's such a large piece of land, it might have an Aldi or a Lidl or whatever might be put on it, that land would have an economic value put onto it. On the broader issue of land, I mean, the focus of the Land Development Agency, I think, is at the moment is trying to get assemble land from ourselves and from some local authorities and other commercial entities from the state sector. Yeah, in the broad context of land values are definitely a significant barrier to delivering affordability. I don't have a simple answer how to deal with that, unfortunately.
Thanks, Jim. Jennifer?
Okay, well, firstly, I want to thank everyone today. I suppose, I mean, affordable housing is so important, particularly now that we are in a housing crisis. And I suppose the biggest issue facing all of us here are the people that fall between, they don't qualify to go on the local authority housing list, and they therefore are paying up to maybe $1,200 a month or $1,300 a month, and they're not qualifying for a mortgage. And this has, I feel, left a massive hole in the whole area of housing, and particularly affordable housing. And I feel it's huge. And you know, I suppose on time scale, and this is what I would ask, that this would be really something that needs to be moved on as quick as possible, because there are those people that are just caught and where they have no help, and this is the only area that I feel that we can give back to them. And can I just address this to you, Paul? You said that the NDFA is providing financial advice to a number of local authorities seeking to develop housing schemes on their lands. You only particularly mentioned 4 here, and they're of course Dublin based. And look, I mean, I know that we are very much based on Dublin here, but I always feel that rural Ireland, I mean, we've got 31 local authorities that all have land banks. They all provide a massive service to everybody. So what are you doing, or what other local authorities are you dealing with here? Because it's so important that we just don't focus on Dublin. I understand that we need to do that too, but I always just feel, even if you look through all the notes there, I was reading through them there, everything is Dublin this and Dublin that. So I just think the rest of Ireland always feels forgotten, and I feel as a Carlow person that's always making reps for people, particularly for affordable housing, that needs to be addressed. So I'm just wondering, what other local authorities are you dealing with? Can I just talk in general about, I suppose one of the major issues would be that there's many land banks around Ireland. Do you often come up against resistance to development? Because recently I had in my own area a particular builders that I'd come that were actually dealing with the AHPs, and as you can see, that seems to be another area that the government are taking. It seems to be huge, more so than building themselves. They seem to be looking at all the AHPs. So I'm just wondering, like, what can we do with legislation on the land banks? Is there anything we can do to help local authorities? Is there anything that we can do to make this go quicker? Because I just feel that, you know, affordable housing, and when you mention affordable housing, people really kind of they feel that we're helping those people that are not able to get on the housing list or get the mortgages that they're looking for. Maybe you might come back to me on the land banks. Can I also ask you, just say to you, we cannot have a situation where developers have no incentive to produce affordable units, because we need affordable units actually at this point. We need homes, and I just feel, are we doing that? What incentives are we doing to create these? Because we need to, you know, we need to make sure they're built. We need to make sure they're built really quick. And I'm just wondering, maybe could one of you come back to me on that too? And just in general, a one size doesn't fit all. And I think a lot of people were speaking to me lately about housing and the building of housing. We need to look at a broader range. We need to look at affordability, but we also need to give people the chance and the option of an affordable house that they want and can afford. And I believe, like, I know I met a lady recently and she said to me, Jennifer, I had to come out of Dublin. I'm actually living now outside because I can't afford a mortgage. I can't afford even now affordable because I'm renting. I can't even afford to rent in Dublin. So what we're doing is, we seem to be, I think, just making everything based on one particular area, where we need to, I think, deliver on other areas, and we need to deliver affordable housing in Carlow and other areas that our people are just crying out for. So maybe if you could just come back to me with those. Again, a lot of the answers or questions that I was going to ask have been answered, and I just think that this is one of the most, I firmly believe affordable housing going forward is just huge. It's huge for people, young people starting off. Like, people would come to me, nurses, teachers, that actually go to the bank now, and because they're actually paying $1,300 or $1,400 a month, they can't save, so they can't get a mortgage. So we need to make sure that these are the people that get these affordable housing now. So if you could come back to me on some of them. Thank you.
Paul, do you want to come first?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, again, our statement just focused on the schemes underway that specifically include an affordable purchase stroke affordable rental piece. But yes, I mean, we're trying to support as many local authorities across the country as possible. So to give you a flavour, we're working with the likes of Westmeath, Kildare, Wicklow. We're talking to the likes of Sligo, Donegal, Kerry, Cork. So it's really, we're trying to reach and stretch ourselves out as broad as possible. So rest assured in that respect. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe just on the land side, we talk about the affordable policy and when that will come into play, but I think that will happen. To me, the biggest enemy is time as well, and how long it takes to get these schemes, not only from the procurement point of view, but getting to procurement. So certainly from our perspective, we're encouraging local authorities who are looking at sites, at least start the ball rolling, get master plans, get planning on those sites. Not only does it de-risk the sites, but it also just gets you up and running as quickly as possible. And that's certainly a key message that we're giving.
So important, yeah.
I suppose in relation to assisting local authorities, the service, I suppose, just to talk about the service site fund, which is an assistance to local authorities in terms of being able to subsidise the cost of infrastructure. Like I'm aware, because we just did a quick look there, initially when that was made available, the first call for proposals, it was restricted to 10 local authorities. That was broadened again out to 19. But it hasn't been made available to all local authorities, and just in relation to your own area, it hasn't been made available. Right, but that's certainly a tool to assist a local authority in being able to make housing more affordable for people in their locality. I suppose the thinking behind the restriction on it is to concentrate in areas where the affordability issue is at its most pronounced. And I suppose that there was the department did have a circular back in October last year where it sought submissions from local authorities to, I suppose, demonstrate the affordability issues they had in their areas to see, so that the department could look at all the submissions and say, well, we should broaden this out. And they did broaden it out, but unfortunately, in relation to Carlow, that wasn't included. But I think that in terms of moving things forward and trying to assist with trying to make things more affordable, the current tool is the Service Site Fund. We understand there will be a further call, and maybe that might be made available to other local authorities. In terms of giving people the option, I mean, absolutely, we're very much in favour of people having the option to purchase as well as to rent if the cost rental gets off the ground and becomes a bigger thing. In terms of incentives to private developers to deliver affordable housing, I suppose that the legislation is there in terms of the Part 5, but it's not currently activated. No. So it's just focused in relation to social housing. And the final thing is the agency does have some land in Carlow, and we have a meeting next week with people down there with the local authority just to try and develop some lands down in Carlow.
It's good to know. Thank you.
Jennifer, Richard, did you want to come in?
Yeah. I have to say I find all this stuff mind-bending, I really do. Because I just look at a site like Shangana and I just think, where the hell are the houses? And this just goes on and on and on, and there's interesting conversations going on about financial modelling and nothing happens. And I, along with the people in the area, just wonder, when is this nonsense going to end? Right? And I'm trying to get to the bottom, and I still don't, and I have to be honest, I've learned some stuff, and thank you for your presentation, but at the end of it, I still can't quite figure out what the problem is, that we can't get people on site in Shangana, where the local people have been screaming for housing for about 5 or 6 years. So, first of all, from the NDFA, you mentioned that you had some involvement in, I think you said, advising the council on financial modelling, I think was the phrase you used. Can you just elaborate that, first of all? What exactly is going on? But, I mean, it just strikes me listening to you, and when I hear about Enniskerry Hill and I think cost rental at $1,200 a month, I mean, this is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous, right? The people who need affordable rental properties, who cannot get on the housing list because their income is too high, are not, for the most part, people can afford $1,200 a month. right? So this is just not going to work for them. And I just think all this work, all this complexity, and at the end of the day, the cost rental we get is not going to actually be affordable for the people who need affordable rental property. So I'd like to get to the bottom of that conundrum and see if you have any comments. And ultimately, this is a policy matter. But would I be right in saying that, you know, would this observation have any relevance to all of this? Is that with every single site, you're saying you've got to take into consideration the particular costs of that site, possibly market conditions in terms of rent, and then the question of what is actually affordable for people. And I just think that is completely the wrong way to go about it. It's just complicating. It means every single site becomes extremely complicated because you have to take all these different things into account. Instead of just saying, surely it would be simpler to say, what is affordable rental? You know, what, in relation to people's income? It is 30 or 35% of people's income. What is affordable purchase? It is the same, right? 30, 35% of people's income. And we are then just simply going to put the capital in necessary or extend out the loans or a combination of both to make sure that every site delivers affordable housing at a definition which is universal. In other words, it doesn't depend on those specific conditions. Because if it depends on those specific conditions, it's inevitably, in many cases, not going to be affordable. Because the particularities of that site, because the site servicing costs, or the Japanese knotweed, you know, I mean, this is ridiculous. Japanese knotweed is going to change the level of affordable rent. That's ridiculous. Don't you agree? And don't we have to sort of say, yeah, this is what is affordable for the people we're trying to deliver affordability for, whether it's affordable purchase or whether it is affordable rental. So I would appreciate a comment on that, and specifically on Shangana. And just two other brief questions. To what extent, if any, are any of you interacting with NAMA on their sites? Not at all. Okay. And to what extent, if any, are you dealing with the affordable component of private developments where there's been LEHAF funding, right? Because again, it's very unclear what's going on. The state is putting in LEHAF funding to strategic development zones and other developments, which are private developments. Well, in some cases private, or in some cases a mix of both. And there's supposed to be an affordable dividend, but it is very, very unclear, again, seems to be linked to market conditions, as to how much affordability we actually getting back for our LEHAF funding, and what is affordability anyway. There doesn't seem to be any kind of clarity on that. In the original documents that the government put out, LEHAF funding was going to deliver 40% of any development that had LEHAF funding was going to be affordable, and then that just vanished. And now we haven't got a clue what we're getting back for the LEHAF funding.
Deputy, so specifically on the Shangana site, we, with the council, just looked at different options that they may look at for the sites. What do I mean by that? We looked at, for example, affordable social on the site, we looked at cost rental, and we looked at a more longer tenure mix of private, social and affordable, and different mixes within that. And it was really just around presenting to the council different options of what may or may not work in that respect. I can't say much more. It is a number of months ago since we've done that analysis, and that is with the council for, I think, for a decision and for progression. We haven't done anything in the last number of months in that respect.
And you know, what sort of definition of affordability in terms of rents, or in terms of affordable purchase was included as one of the considerations, was it?
Correct, yes.
And in some models not?
Yes.
Yeah, but I just don't understand how you can do that without having clear definitions of what affordability is.
Well, it's difficult. Yeah, it's about looking at, but we're still trying to progress these schemes. I mean, we're waiting for the legislation to come through. We're trying to see what could potentially work on these sites. And just from my perspective on that particular site, cost rental emerged as a really viable opportunity for that site, and also from your perspective in terms of retaining in-state ownership as well, and it ticks a number of boxes. But back to your point, as your second point as well, there is a distinction between cost rental and affordable rental, and that is something we're acutely aware of. And you know, until the concept has to be proven. I know Jim's, in terms of Enniskerry Road, has been the pathfinder, if you like, and St Michael's and maybe Shangana to follow. But we're still in those early days, but we're trying to make sure, from our perspective, that that cost rental means affordable rental. That's what we're trying to do.
Jim.
Just in terms of what's affordable, I suppose there's an accepted norm in terms of it being no more than 25%, and that's what's actually set out in legislation in terms of the affordable purchase scheme. Just in the opening statement that we made, we said, I suppose, the aspiration is that that's the point of entry, as in that's your limit at the point of entry into paying your mortgage or to paying your rent, and that over time that would actually become lower. You'd actually spend a lower proportion of your income. So I think in terms of the theory behind affordability, I think there is a good understanding of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of 1,200 rent in Enniskerry, I've talked about it a number of times, but like there are households in that area, I think, will be very keen to access that. I mean, there won't be, just above the income limits in terms of social housing. They'll have to be a little bit further above the income limits. But certainly in terms of a couple who, depending on who's earning what and whatnot, it'd be in the region of maybe €55,000 in terms of income at the point of entry, and they could still be in 25 or slightly less. So. Could we get it lower in another site? Yes, I'd hope we would be able to get it lower. The broader point you made about the fact that the current system that we're trying to operate is based on specific site characteristics, local market conditions, and then trying to work on what's affordable. I think essentially that is what we're trying to do. There isn't what you're describing as a kind of a broad brush approach in terms of setting a standard across the country and then backfilling the funding behind it. I suppose that's not the approach that's been taken at the moment. So it is quite specific to each site, the local market conditions. And I'm aware of the fact that it's been brought up elsewhere that in that location of Enniskerry Road, the neighbouring apartments are an awful lot more expensive to rent. So I think there's little risk in terms of putting those on the market. They will be rented. In other areas, 1,200 is more than the market rent, so they wouldn't rent there. So I acknowledge the fact that there is a degree of, well, there's quite a lot of complexity in the way it's been developed at the moment. Yeah.
We'll do one quick fire round.
Just one supplementary. From the point of view of doing it, whatever about the political merits of it, wouldn't it just be easier? Would you accept that it would just be easier if you didn't have to look at every, from a just purely practical point of view, and if it was easier, it'd probably be quicker?
What I think, because of my previous training as a quantity surveyor, that the problem would move to another part of the process. So that bit might be the easy bit, but then trying to find the funding to make the rest of it work might be the hard bit. So.
I just had a couple of quick questions just before we go into the quick fire. So, three members in the room here that are all very familiar with the Enniskerry Road site as well. And I don't think the knotweed was the big cost on the site. We can make light of things, but that's not the big cost on the site. And you are hitting pure granite on a sloping site there, which is very expensive.
Yes.
The excavation would be expensive. And if you were to go back and take out the underground parking, that would set us back a couple of years, I would imagine, on getting on site.
Well, from a planning point of view, there'd be an issue on that. Yeah.
And the average rent in that area, and while 1,200 I do think is high for cross rental, and I would like it to be a lot lower, the reality is the average rent up there, you're probably in the region of 1,800 to 2,000, I would imagine. In that area. So while it's not ideal, I presume it's always the lowest price possible for rent is what you're going for when you're calculating your figures.
Yep.
And that would be site specific, obviously.
Yes.
You know, other sites may not have the excavation or the underground car parking, so that the costs can come down. So there's different variants all the time, and so a one-size-fits-all approach, you know, while it sounds amazing, in the realistic world, as you said, the problem does move elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. You know, we're all frustrated at the time delays it's taken to deliver around affordable housing, and I understand the complexities that are around that. But do you feel now that we're moving in the right direction?
I think, yeah, I mean, I've been involved in NSK Road for quite a while, as has colleagues there at the back of the room there in Dunleer Down. So I'm actually personally delighted. I passed by the site, and although they weren't operational, there was 2 machines on site at the weekend, so mainly doing site investigation work. But I'm personally happy that that's happened, and I think that there is momentum there to make it work. And on the affordable purchase side, again, ideally we would be further down the road than where we are, but it is, you know, it's happening after a period of delay. Yeah.
And then just the final question, when it comes to areas outside of Dublin, because obviously as a committee we don't just look at Dublin, we look at the 31 local authorities, so there is local authorities where there is natural affordability. Are you asked to help in any shape or form there, or is there a requirement to intervene there?
No, as I mentioned, we are asked to help. So, for example, in Westmeath, we have a site they're developing in Athlone, and we're advising them on that. But there's a natural, hopefully affordable element to that, but it's only a private social mix to that site. And also we're advising multiple other local authorities as well outside of Dublin. Yeah.
Thanks. Owen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And look, just a couple of supplementary questions. I mean, just to labour the point, I mean, on the basis of the Housing Agency's own definition of affordability at the start, you would need a monthly net income of €3,650 or a weekly income of €842 for that to be affordable according to the generally accepted definition. And the only reason I'm emphasising that is because obviously Enniskerry Road is going to happen, it's on site, etc. The next really big project is St Michael's, and therefore, because it seems to be that everybody in the room is saying it would be much better if the rents were lower than €1,200 a month, we need to try and find a way of making sure that with St Michael's that's achieved. And while the St Michael's Estate and Inchicore doesn't have the site-specific problems of Enniskerry Road, if I understand it right, the European Investment Bank loan is over a much shorter period of time. So the challenge is less to do with the site-specific stuff, but it's to do with the financing of it, which is why I think your contributions are so important. Yeah. Just a couple of technical questions in relation to Enniskerry Road. To the Housing Agency, can you just talk us through what the management and maintenance formula is, just so we get a sense of what does that add on to the tender price that you mentioned at the start in terms of the overall costs? For the tender price you mentioned, 45 million, is that just for construction? Is it for construction and site servicing, or are there other costs built into there? That does give you a unit price of about 300,000. That is substantially above the average cost for apartments built by the state. And is it, as Maria said, the issue of the granite, the issue of the car parking, or are there other costs rolled in there that you can talk through us? And then, I suppose, both in relation to Enniskerry Road, but specifically in relation to St Michael's, if the question is, how do we get the price down? Because the entry-level rent, it only gets cheaper over time if your income rises. And for a lot of modest income workers, their incomes are the least likely to rise sufficiently over time. So there's no guarantee that somebody will actually get much of a benefit 10 years in if their income remains the same. So, for example, with Enniskerry Road, if the site serviced allocation had been doubled, would that have, how much would that have allowed you to bring down the entry level rent? So if it was 8 million or if it was 12 million. Likewise with St Michael's, because this is the one I'm exceptionally concerned about, because whatever about the peculiarities of Enniskerry Road, if St Michael's comes in at 1,000, 1,200, people are going to see cost rental as an unaffordable option. So, for example, is it a 25-year EIB loan? Is that going to cause a difficulty in terms of the entry-level rents? What would you need to extend the maturity of the loan to bring them below the 900 mark? Likewise with the Service Sites Fund, what would you need to increase the Service Sites Fund? So I'm not again asking you to state an opinion, but give the committee the options. And then the final thing is, I'd love to see some of those spreadsheets for those different options. I'm sure other committee members would. I don't know if you're in a position to share them with us, but if you are at any stage, I think we'd really benefit from them, whether it's Enniskerry Road after it's all signed and completed, or because I think that the more detailed information we have, the better we understand it. But the crucial question is, with Enniskerry Road and with St Michael's, what would it take to bring it down to the 700 to 900 in terms of increased capital, or particularly with St Michael's, longer low maturities?
Yeah, just to follow on in relation, firstly, and briefly, I promise this time on the cost rental piece. If you look at the figure of €1,200 for Enniskerry Road, and you take the average income in Dublin, if my colleagues will indulge me, that as a percentage of net take-home pays about 42% for a single earner. So it's way above what would be deemed as the affordable level of about a third of net take-home pay, 30 to 35%. So it is significant. I think you're getting the picture from the committee. I'm not looking, that is a concern when we hear a government scheme of cost rental, that whilst it's below Dublin market rates, like Dublin market rates are if you take the average as per the RTB across all of Dublin, like we're nearing 2,000 now. So I suppose saying it's below market rate when the market is so inflated is a problem that we have, and I think you get that. So that will be one thing. But I wanted to ask you specifically about St Michael's Estate, and this is Paul, for yourself, if you don't mind. You've the 70% proposed for affordable rental. Who gave the figure for 70% to yourselves? Because that hadn't been something that it's been specifically. I don't mean who, which person, or was that a direction from the department basically you might wish to answer? And one final question for yourself, Jim, if you don't mind. You referenced Castlelands, which is a very big, large, significant site in Balbriggan. Now, that currently, that's not with, what we found out today, it's not actually with the Land Development Agency. It's still with you. So the plans that you, as you know, a master plan was issued by and published by Fingal County Council, which is closed for public consultation at this stage, and we'll come back to the local authority in September. How many, what percentage of rental and cost rental are you guys proposing there on the Castleland site? What percentage of social and what percentage of affordable purchase stroke private purchase are you proposing at Castlelands? And what figure do you have as the total number of units that would be from a housing agency perspective, if you don't mind? I know that's quite parochial, Chair, but it is important because it's the biggest site that there is a proposed transfer to the LDA on, and obviously we've got to ensure that when all cost rental and affordable purchase and social that we're actually taking into account the wider issues in the area as well.
I'm going to Victor next, but just you might not have specific answers to some of the questions, and if you don't, that's okay. If you want to send them into the committee afterwards, we can circulate them to members. Victor.
Here, look, firstly, I think we'll all agree that land costs are a barrier to housing affordability. I think there's no one disagreeing with that, so I think that's worth emphasising. I just want to ask one question directly to the housing agency, and that's Jim. And it is really just to say, are you still in the business of acquiring lands or properties? That's a very simple question. And if so, is there an inventory of them? Because what I've noticed about the housing agency, they were involved in the past in acquiring properties. There's always a conflict when state agents are acquiring. Certainly built properties, that can be an issue in terms of the affordability in the market and the competition that's out there. Now, I know things have changed over the last few years, but it has been an issue with the housing agency before. And also how it acquires property. So is there an inventory of housing sites? You referred to one there in Carlow, which I think came as a surprise to my colleague, but is there a national inventory of your sites and your properties? And if so, can that be made available to the committee?
Thanks, Victor. Have I any further questions? Jennifer?
Just to follow up, I suppose information is crucial here, and I think the projects that Jim and Paul, you both have mentioned, all of you, these were nearly like a pilot scheme going forward for the rest of us to learn from, and I think it's crucial that these are done right and given people the opportunity to afford a house. So I just think from now on, all of us will probably learn lessons from this, and these will be the pilot schemes going forward to the rest of the country, and it's crucial that we get these right. Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. Pat, did you have anything else? No. Okay, Richard.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. The cost of finance generally, you know, how much does it vary? How much is it impacting on, you know, on the final question of rent in terms of cost rental, or for that matter, purchase price? And what are the different sources of finance, and what sort of variability is there in terms of the cost of finance at different times, and overall in terms of these different projects? But the big question I have, is really just an elaboration of the earlier one, is, see, I don't quite, everything you seem to be doing seems to be based on just sites, particular sites. And it makes me think, and I think other people think, that you don't really have a remit for dealing with the overall affordable housing crisis. You just seem to have a remit for particular sites. And indeed, you might maybe explain, because it just seems quite random, right? You get particular sites. Why do you get particular sites and not get other sites? And how does it fit into some sort of overall plan to deal with the crisis in terms of affordable housing and affordable rental? And does it relate in any general sense to the targets? Like, say, for example, the national housing output targets of 25,000, are you supposed to deliver a certain amount of cost rental as part of that output, a certain amount of affordable housing as part of that output on a year-by-year basis? And if so, what is it? And do you select the sites? Do the government select the sites for you? I'm just not clear how it fits into a bigger project to solve the housing crisis.
Thanks, Richard. Jim?
Okay. I'll go back to Owen's question there, just in terms of the cost of Enniskerry Road in a bit more detail on it. The cost of the construction cost is 45 million, including that. And that's what was tendered. That's, I suppose, the bricks and mortar, the concrete and all that sort of stuff. That's that element of it. There's other costs to do with fees, etc. That's outside that. So going in then to the operational side of it, we have I suppose a kind of a base model with approved housing bodies in terms of how they model and maintain social housing stock. So that was the starting point in relation to where we looked at Enniskerry Road and where the proposals came in from TUA and Respond. It is quite similar. In a lot of the same things happen. You have to replace the windows after 20 years or whatever. So that type of model was the basis of it, and they have their operational costs and their overhead costs, etc. So that was looked at and pared back a bit, effectively, particularly in terms of the kind of overhead costs. They were pared back. What wasn't pared back is the replacement of infrastructure. That was left unadjusted. There is a significant figure in terms of over time, that element is a significant element in terms of the overall cost. I can't give you a quick figure on that. We might be able to follow up with something on that in terms of coming something back on it. In terms of what could make a big difference, again, I was thinking about trying to do a quick calculation, but I'm nervous about doing it. But well, my previous training was quantity surveyor, so I'd be very nervous about doing it because I know the kind of trouble you can get into giving bad figures. In relation to service side fund, like this 4 million, which over 50 units is €80,000. If that was 120,000, it would definitely make an impact. I think it would be at least €100 a month, you know. But I don't, again, I'd have to come back. What we might do is come back and give some sort of a scenario case saying, like, if it was another amount, it would have a bigger impact. In terms of the length of the loan, that did have a big impact because it went from, because our initial modelling was 25 years, we went out to 40. Going longer than 40, modelling has been done. I know that the NDFA has looked at modelling which is going out to 50. But I suppose you can model it as long a loan as you like. You have to get somebody to lend you that loan. So we had to get something in place with the HFA where they would actually do that. So longer loans, definitely it reduces the cost and the payback per year or per month, but you have to get a lender to give you the money. So I think we could maybe give some examples of that as well back. Just moving on then to the 1,200 being 42% of income in Dublin. I'm guessing that's maybe an individual's income. Yeah. So
single person, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the aspiration is that the 2-bed will be it'll be probably 2 people will live in them, to make good use of them as well in terms of Enniskerry Road. St Michael's Estate to 70%.
Well, if you take it even as a couple, by the way, in Dublin, if you were to go, the average rent would still be above 30%. But, and that is what would the benchmark affordability rate. But I take your point. Yeah. Okay.
I might leave to 70% St Michael's Estate to the NDFA. Yeah, when they come back.
And Castlelands.
On the Castlelands, well, I suppose there was a reason why we didn't mention the Castlelands in the opening statement, because it is more complicated, and I suppose the kind of the master plan certainly moved on densities. We would have earmarked that site for around 500, 550. Now you're talking about at least 700 homes on that site. So it hasn't
500
really.
550 on cost rental. Sorry.
Well,
just
no, in terms of
okay.
In terms of the capacity,
okay.
What we used to. When we looked at that site in the past, prior to the current master plan, we would have looked at it kind of delivering around 500 or 550 homes. That's gone up to over 700 now, which is a good thing. But we have yet to, I suppose, get any sort of meaningful sort of discussion about how it will be broken down. So it still needs to be, like, I suppose we said, listen, let the master plan process play out, and then we'll come back to it. And
so there's no split between.
There's no hard split, no. Okay, no, not at this stage.
Thank you.
The next question was just in relation to whether the housing agency is still buying land or property. We're not buying land. The land that we have was transferred either through the land aggregation scheme or through the NBA, which we effectively absorbed. In terms of property, we are buying property. We're buying housing under Rebuilding Ireland. I won't talk too much about that, but that is actively happening under the 70 million fund, and we also do some specific stuff for local authorities in relation to homeless provision. In terms of getting a kind of a national inventory of the agency's land, it's in a couple of places. Rebuilding Ireland has a map in it on the website, and you can look at over 700 pieces of land that are owned by local authorities. The housing agency's land is a subdivision of that, so that's on that website. So you can go to any local authority area and you can look at and see if we have. You can click on a little icon and kind of get rid of it there. We also have a document. I was just checking our website there, which I probably shouldn't have been doing, but anyway, we have a new website up, which I can't find out where it is, but we do have, it's only just changed in the last couple of days, but there is a strategic development and management plan that we put on our website, which goes to all our lands and gives you quite a bit of detail actually on each site. So that is available for anybody to download. Then in relation to cost of finance, I'll let the NDFA talk about that. And just in terms of it not being a joined up plan, while we do look at individual sites, there is the framework of the legislation in terms of certainly affordable purchase. The overall, the high level framework is there with the legislation. The regulations are partially in place, and the rest of it will be in place in the autumn. So that is a framework there in terms of approaching affordability in terms of affordable purchase. And in terms of cost rental, we are at an earlier stage. It is I suppose a pilot stage, and the policies are still not developed, but there will be a framework there as well, and hopefully it'll make that a bit clearer in due course.
Thank you. Deputy O'Brien, maybe just for instance the 70%, just as a quick answer to that, that would have been in discussions with Dublin City Council. So they would have asked us to model on that basis, with the 30% remainder being for social housing. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy O'Brien, just on the modelling, so on the funding, we would have modelled on the basis of 25 years for EIB, correct? Now, but this was done last year, to be open with you. So, and back to Jim's point, and interested with the Pathfinder, they're looking at in terms of longer than that, and that's certainly what we're trying to do as well. But I think it's important for the committee and just the timing, back to my point on timing on these. So in St Michael's, they're looking at design at the moment. Then they have to get planning, then they have to get a developer in. You know, we are talking years in this respect. So when we're looking at funding, it's something obviously we're aware of, but it's going to be quite some time before we're locking in that funding. And our role is to make sure that that's as competitive as possible, and hence, for example, why we're not looking at the private sector in this respect. We're looking at what's available to the state, whether it's through the HFA or through EIB, lending directly to local authorities, or through the HFA, whatever gives the state the best options in that respect. And I mentioned earlier as well, we've been looking at, as another point, well, you mentioned, sorry, the upfront funding, upfront capital as potential to reduce the rents, and we've also been looking at interest-only portions of the debt in recognition that the assets have capital value at the end of their lives as well. But the point, it's basically that portion of the loan wouldn't be, principal wouldn't be repaid during the operating period. It would be interest only during the 25 years.
Almost like a second tranche of repayment after that.
It's reckoned, so there's at the end of the 25 or 40 years, whatever it may be, there's a debt outstanding, but also there's an asset has a residual capital value at that point.
And does that debt outstanding have to be paid in a lump sum or paid down over a period of time?
Again, that can be flexed to be determined. Yeah,
and the EIB provides that kind of loan finance?
No, well, I think if in fairness for EIB, they would look for an amortising loan, to be clear with you. It's more whether HFA or others could help.
Or the state, for example?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Deputy Barr, just in terms of our role, so we're advising across all different sectors. We don't have a particular focus just on housing, so we're very much more in the project space in terms of working with local authorities as projects arise that they want us to be involved in.
Who wants you to be involved?
With local authorities or government departments or agencies. Yeah.
So that they come to you, basically?
Yes. Yeah. But they come to us, but we'd also reach out to them when we know, just in terms of the capital, in the National Development Plan, etc. When we know there's projects coming up, we would obviously reach out to be as supportive as possible.
Okay, but you're not tied in directly, if you like, to the implementation of the overall Rebuilding Ireland plan. You're just brought in.
We're a support function, if you like. Yeah, within that.
Just a technical clarification, very quickly. Just to go back to the 25-year EIB loan for St Michael's, if the loan had to be paid in full over the 25 years, do you think that would make it difficult to achieve rents below 1,200 euros a month if the service size fund was equivalent to what's in Enniskerry Road?
Yes.
Do you think that would be a barrier?
Yes, is the answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I thank all our witnesses for attending today? We went on a bit longer, but I think we'll all agree it was really informative, and I really appreciate the information that you have given us. So thank you for the engagement with the committee today. I propose, members, that we suspend for 5 minutes just to switch over to our next session and give people a little break for 5 minutes. Is that agreed? Thank you. 5 minutes. Oh, well. At the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely or switched to airplane safe or flight mode depending on their device. It's not sufficient to just put your phones on silent, as this will maintain a level of interference with the broadcasting system. Item number 7 on the agenda is our continued topic on affordable housing. I would like to welcome to today's meeting Ms Philomena Poole and Ms Catherine Keenan from Darragh County Council, and Mr Owen Keegan and Mr Brendan Kenny from Dublin City Council. Before we begin, I just wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 172I of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to so do, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on Ms Philomena Poole to make her opening statement.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to make the submission to the Joint Committee on Planning, Housing and Local Government. I'm joined today by Ms Catherine Keenan, who is Director of Housing for Dún Laoghaire County Council. DLR has historically been and remains one of the most expensive parts of Dublin, and indeed the state in which to purchase or rent a home. The county has excellent transport links in both Lewis and Dart, and this transport infrastructure is one of the key drivers for premium prices. DLR saw the fastest surge in prices in the capital in July 2018, with prices up by 9.8%. In contrast, South Dublin saw an increase of just 5.2%, and the median price for Dublin as a whole was $360,000 in July, while in DLR it was $527,000, compared with $320,000 for both Fingal and South Dublin. The affordability problem is therefore particularly severe in DLR, and it's extremely important that we seek to maximise affordability on our own lands. The Council approved an affordable housing scheme of priority at its meeting on the 30th of May 2019. Further regulations are required from the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government with regard to qualifying criteria and income limits. DLR Land Bank. DLR is a limited land bank comprising 55 hectares, of which 42 hectares are available for housing, including the Shangana Castle site, 11.2 hectares, of which 8.7 are for residential purposes. 1/3 of the portfolio is classified as urban infill and is served by public infrastructure and facilities necessary to provide housing. However, a significant proportion of the land portfolio is located on unserviced lands. The southern part of the county and adjoining areas of North Wicklow has major water supply and foul drainage network deficits. Proposals in relation to new water supply and sewage network schemes are being progressed through Irish Water. Lands at Old Connaught, Rathmichael and adjoining areas in North Wicklow, which have major water supply and drainage deficits, will be serviced as part of the future implementation of the Old Connaught Woodbrook Water Supply Drainage Scheme, which is needed to unlock the development potential of the area. It is expected that analysis of the capacity of the foul drainage network will be completed in late 2020. Irish Water received planning permission in January 2019 to construct the Ballyman reservoirs and associated trunk main. Roads infrastructure in these areas also need to be addressed. In relation to current projects, I'm aware the Enniskerry road site was referenced by the Housing Agency earlier. The scheme is a Pathfinder project in Rebuilding Ireland, and as such is a cost rental pilot being supported by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government. The project will see the first of the homes delivered under the cost rental model in the country, commencing on site in June 2019, with full completion expected at the end of 2021. The project, which had prior Part 8 planning approval, was developed up to tender stages by DLR for construction of 155 social and affordable homes, a community facilities and green space, and is the result of collaboration between DLR, the Housing Agency, Respond and TUA Housing Associations and the Housing Finance Agency. Financial support is also being provided by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government through the Service Sites Fund for the cost rental homes. Respond and TUA will carry out the project as development agents for DLR on land provided by the Housing Agency under the Land Aggregation Scheme. The Enniskerry Road Scheme comprises 50 cost rental homes and 105 social homes to be apportioned between Respond and TUA. The homes will be a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bed properties. All of the 50 cost rental homes will be 2 bed apartments. The Department intends to develop a national policy approach to cost rental in Ireland based on the learnings from the cost rental pilot in Enniskerry. Loughlinstown Wood DLR is currently working in partnership with the Loughlinstown Cooperative Group and Cooperative Housing Ireland as an innovative approach to housing delivery which will provide for 42 homes, 8 co-op and 34 social on lands provided by DLR. CHI have obtained planning permission for the overall scheme and the project has been tendered. Tender evaluation is currently taking place. CHI have obtained planning permission for the 42 dwellings and is in the process of tendering the contract. They will also project manage during construction. On-site construction is expected to commence in Q3 2019 with completion at Q2 2021. In terms of future projects then, Ballyogan Court, the lands at Ballyogan Court are residual lands left over from the construction of the M50 motorway. The proposed development provides for 119 quality dwellings with a mix of home types comprising 52 apartments and 67 houses. Part 8 planning was approved by the Council on the 7th of June 2019. The scheme will be progressed as rapid build and preparation for tender is now underway. A Service Site Fund application has been submitted to the Department for the provision of infrastructure associated to the affordable homes. The scheme will provide a mix of social and affordable for sale and or cost rental dwellings. The number of each home type, size and location will be informed by the outcome of the second call for the Service Sites Fund, the financial model and the development route. St Lawrence's Park is the current home of Stillorgan Library and 16 vacant masonettes, recently fully detenanted, which are in need of extensive refurbishment. The site is adjacent to the Stillorgan Leisureplex and the N11 Stillorgan Road. The library, housed in a prefabricated building, is one of the most busiest in the county. The proposal for the development of the site provides for residential development of 89 social and affordable homes and a new library. The scheme will provide a mix of social, affordable, for sale and or cost rental homes. The number of each home type, size and location will be informed by the outcome of the second call for the Service Sites Fund, the financial model and the development route. The Council commissioned a revised cost-effective analysis as requested by the Department and DEEPR, which informs the Stage 2 application which has now been submitted. The Shangana Castle lands are located on the southern side of Shankill. The local area plan adopted in 2017 cleared the way for detailed master planning in the area. Residential development is being supported by the provision of substantial new road and rail transport infrastructure under the LIHAF and by the National Transport Authority. Woodbrook Shangana is also a major urban housing delivery site. The Woodbrook Shangana LAP requires the delivery of a new DART station at Woodbrook, midway between Bray and Shankill, with a cost of between 4 to 5 million. The NTA's transport strategy includes the provision of a rail station at Woodbrook. In terms of road infrastructure, there are localised improvements, upgrades required to the Dublin Road corridor between the Wilford Interchange and the Woodbrook Shangana LAP, which will be informed by the outcome of the NTA Core Bus Corridor Study. Cross-party proposal for 200 social and 340 affordable homes was agreed at the Council meeting of the 4th of September 2017. As part of the development project, the need to establish strong governance procedures and protocols is required. A cost-effective analysis in conjunction with the multi-criteria assessment was undertaken on the proposal. The analysis was submitted as part of the Stage 1 approval. It highlighted that there were difficulties with affordability, in particular in relation to apartments. The estimated cost of developing the Shangana Castle site is approximately 132 million, without any affordable subsidy. The Executive has been working with the National Development Finance Agency and the Land Development Agency to examine delivery options, and it is intended that the scheme will comprise a mix of social, affordable purchase and cost rental. The master plan for the site is nearing completion and thereafter preparations will commence for planning. It is expected that the project will be ready to proceed to planning in Q4 2019. DLR welcomes the prospect of delivering affordable homes in the county and is currently actively working in collaboration with the development partners on 2 mixed tenure sites, which will deliver 50 cost rental homes and 8 affordable purchase homes. The future projects at design and planning stages will provide mixed tenure sites with provision for around 400 for 20 affordable cost rental homes. The number of each home type, size and location will, as I said, be informed by the outcome of the second call of the Service Sites Fund and the financial model and development route. We have already maximised or at design stages for the bulk of our viable service lands. The provision of housing, both social and affordable, on the remainder of DLR lands is dependent on major infrastructure being in place. we're happy to take questions on the submission, which both myself and Ms Keenan will take between us.
Thanks, Philomena. I'd now like to call Mr Owen Keegan to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Brendan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation. We have submitted our statement and report, so we're happy to go straight into questions.
Okay, no problem. Our first member is Senator Boyhan.
Thank you very much, and particularly like to welcome the City Manager, Owen Keegan, and Dunleary Down County Manager, Philomena Poole, and Catherine and Brendan. Our paths have crossed, so I'm very familiar with them, and I'm sure they're familiar with me. And I also want to take this opportunity, as I set out before I ask a few questions, I want to acknowledge, because I think it's important, we don't say it enough, and despite what other people might say, I want to acknowledge the enormous work of housing authorities per se, and the personnel in housing authorities, and why many of us are passionate and make strong cases for people who are on our social housing list and seeking affordable housing. We all have personal experiences and personal stories, and we bring them to the table. And in all of that, sometimes it can be quite heated and exchange, but I think people are always coming from being motivated about trying to help people, and I think that's important. But at the other side of that is the staff, the frontline staff in housing, and I just want to acknowledge that, because sometimes that's lost. It's lost on me, and I speak for myself, not altogether lost, but in the heat of the thing, we all want to do things, and I am constantly being contacted by people outside of Dublin with major issues, and they go way beyond housing needs. There are housing needs and homelessness, there are complexities around all of that, as you well know. But I think it's important to say it, and I want to put that on the record here today. I want to acknowledge the enormous work under very difficult circumstances, and it's not a nice place to be at a hatch turning people away all the time. So I think that's important to say. So I just want to keep my broad brushstrokes, because I'm conscious there are two authorities here, and I suppose the one thing we all agree is that, you know, the cost of land is a barrier to affordability, and that's what's on the agenda here today: affordable housing. We're conscious that there are land banks in both authorities that are here today, and I suppose I'm really interested on a few things. One, I have been constantly tracking the auditor, and we had the local government auditor here only recently to the committee, talking about the concerns in relation to how we document and map and take account of our state properties, particularly in relation to every local authority in the country. So I'd like to know, one, is the progress there on that? Two, is there potential there to submit or surrender this land or make this land available to people? And I've always said, and I'm saying it here again, I have no ideological hang-up who's building houses, whether they're public or private, whether they're builders or they're social or affordable or cooperative. We need more housing. We all accept we need more housing. So I just want to ask that question. And then I just want to go back on, for instance, in relation to the what you call the housing issues. We know that the government have said that at least 30% of land released from central bodies and local authorities like our own should be for affordable element to them, that 30%, with an additional 10% of Part 5, and where possible and practical and with cooperation of others and all the parties involved, we could increase that. So I'd like to hear what's the possibilities there in relation to that. Specifically, I want to just mention in relation to NAMA. Could you explain or tell us about your personal experiences with NAMA in terms of your council's experiences and interface with NAMA in the release of properties that could possibly be made available for affordable housing? There's many figures bandied out there, but what is the practicalities? The audits have been done, you've looked at properties have been rejected. I don't want to rehearse all that, you know that as well as I do. So I'd be interested in hearing of that. Also, the practicalities of the LIHAF, and particularly I aim to focus here now on Cherrywood, SDZ, and the affordability in relation to LIHAF, and where is all that? Because I don't consider any of them to be affordable up there, and I've no angst with the fact it's a private development. I just don't see how affordable houses are going to be delivered up in Cherrywood. So, really then about the land bank. We hear that there are substantial lands in the IDA. We hear there are substantial lands in relation to Irish Rail. We hear there are substantial lands in relation to the port companies. I'd be familiar with both port companies that fall into your administrative areas. We hear there are substantial lands in relation to the HSE. And clearly you don't have control over all of them, but you have some input into them in terms of planning, and you would have a knowledge of them, I'm sure. And do you, as manager, city manager and county manager, see the potential, or how can we harness and have a multi-focused approach to how can we harness some of this land, going back to what I said and what we have all agreed, the more land we have, and if we can reduce the cost of this land, we can reduce the costs of developing these houses and ultimately the cost of these properties, be they to purchase or be they to be rented. So back to that issue of affordability. I'm going to finish on that. They're sort of broad stroke views, questions, but I think they're very central to how we can address the issue of land costs and the barrier that that is impacting on affordability.
Thanks, Victor. Philomena.
If I take it just in reverse first and take about the Cherrywood site that you mentioned, the LIHAF funds for Cherrywood were 11.39 million. And if we were to spread those across all of the homes that are due to be delivered, it would be such a minuscule amount that it wouldn't actually have any substantial impact on affordability. That will pay for affordability for 300 homes over the entire lifetime of Cherrywood as a reduction. So it will be 11.39 million divided by 300 homes. And that will allow us to bring those units down by about 40,000. But that will depend on the size of the unit. So we're talking probably concentrating primarily on the smaller units. The town centre has commenced and it'll be 2021 on completion. But it'll be 300 homes over the duration of the entire Cherrywood scheme. In relation to land being given for free, I think that was the question that you were asking, whether or not that would be a consideration. DLR is somewhat of an outlier in that it is a far more expensive place to buy, to build, to deliver housing and indeed to rent on housing. For that reason, the Shangana site, we are not actually going to put a cost of the land against it. And in doing so, that will bring the land down further. I don't believe that that is something that we would be in a position to do across every local authority, or indeed that we ourselves would be in a position to do across every site. It is the very nature of the county and the urgent need to actually have something to deliver on that. On our discussions with other agencies, I believe that counties have to be delivered in the round, and that it is important that we have IDA lands because we want investment to actually be able to deliver on a whole range of things. Public realm lands are also important. Health service land is important. But there are times when there are plots of land which might be able to contribute to the housing issue. You mentioned earlier about the Dundrum Central Mental Hospital. Clearly that's going to have a dramatic impact when that land comes to bear. And we would be in discussions with the LDA, and indeed from a planning perspective we have had some thoughts around that. The HRI lands, and Catherine might be in a position just to add some more about that, would be another site that we would have had some discussions on. We don't have dramatic pieces of IDA land in the county. It tends to be privately owned, and just the very nature that there aren't large industrial parks as there might be in other places where that land would be given. So I think that answers most of those. Do you want to just mention the HRI piece?
Yeah, just the elected members had actually approached us about lands in the HRI lands. So we have had initial discussions.
So HRI lands meaning horse racing?
Horse racing Ireland, yeah.
Okay.
We have had initial discussions, but they're very initial at this stage. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
I suppose many of the same considerations apply in the city. In relation, I'll just take it in reverse. We very much welcome the establishment of the Land Development Agency because we do recognise that there are substantial lands in public ownership. You mentioned Irish Rail, Dublin Bus, another big owner, HSE, and there is certainly scope for those lands to be used more efficiently and some lands to be released for housing. But that will require an agency with very significant capital resources, and we have engaged extensively with the LDA about particular sites. In terms of our own land, we have limited land resources that are in our direct ownership. The bulk of that, as we said in the notice, is being applied for social housing, which is our primary obligation. And we are, making land available for affordable schemes. I suppose the challenge we have, if we were to seek to recover the cost of that land, and even where we're not proposing to make any charge for that land, it's going to be difficult to produce affordable units because there are constraints on some of these sites in terms of the cost of building generally. So while we can certainly guarantee we can deliver units below the market price, it mightn't match people's expectations about affordability. I don't know if my colleague wants to say anything further.
Just on the mix, in our scheme, the O'Devna scheme, which will be announcing a developer for that in the next few weeks, is 50% private, 30% social and 20% affordable. It's the same with Oscar Traynor Road in St Michael's Estate in Inchicore. It's 70% cost rental and 30% social. So we're using different models. And if land costs are thrown into the pot, it's just not affordable. We work very well with NAMA. We've taken everything that NAMA wanted to give us a few years ago, except 2 small schemes, and there were reasons why we didn't take that. And as Eoin says, we very much welcome the Land Development Agency because we have limited land and they have potential maybe to tap into those other lands that you spoke about.
Just one question, just in relation to O'Debney Gardens, that you retain the nominating rights to all these developments, do you? No, in terms of nominating people to take these properties in terms of from your lists or whatever?
We will for the social. We'll be nominating people.
For the affordable?
For the affordable as well. If an affordable scheme is in place, they'll be coming from ourselves, yes. And the private developer then will send the private.
And that's likewise in Dunleary for the affordable. You nominate, like for Shangana, you'll nominate the people there, will you?
In terms of Shangana, the department is we're waiting cost rental scheme. So at the moment, we believe it will be within the range of 50 to 75,000. So, but we're waiting on the parameters from the department, and there's a group set up now to develop a cost rental scheme, and that's in gestation at the moment. So, in terms of Shangana, which is a few years down the road before we actually get to that point, we should have the scheme in place by then.
But can I just say, but it would be your desire to have the nomination rights for those?
Oh, sorry, absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks.
Darragh?
Yeah, thank you very much to all of you for your presentation. It follows on from presentations we had obviously earlier on. I want to turn to just the first things first, which is both of you have mentioned the Land Development Agency and both welcomed its establishment. It was actually announced in September last year. No land has actually been transferred over to them, so they're not a legal entity. There's no legislation to guide them. So at this stage, so I'm just wondering what interaction do both from a Dunleary Rathdown and a Dublin City Council perspective do you have actually with the LDA? Are you identifying, or are they asking you to help to identify other land banks with other agencies that Victor mentioned here today, such as HSE, CIE, etc. And I know CIE, in fairness, are one of the better state agencies at actually using their own land portfolio. I'm also aware that Dublin Bus are looking to decamp from some of their depots in the city, which the city has been helpful with too, to actually free up land within the city. So that would be one thing if you could address, just particularly in Dunleary Rathdown, and thank you very much for a detailed statement here today. A couple of things. Obviously, the average price for a first-time buyer is way out of reach for anyone, even with the bank of mom and dad. That's something. It's like 527,000 is a staggering amount of money as an average price. What are your concerns into the future for the demographics within Dunleary Rathdown as a local authority area? Because I think in the absence of a workable, affordable purchase scheme and a workable cost rental and affordable rental scheme, one would actually think that with prices continuing like that, and I've attended meetings in Dunleary and spoken at housing meetings out there, and there's a massive concern amongst people in the area of their inability ever to be able to even think about owning a house or an apartment, let alone anything else. So from a local authority perspective, what are your concerns about the future demographics of your county if it continues like this? I did want to ask as well, particularly Philomena, if you don't mind, you have stated very clearly here that I know that the priority scheme for the affordable purchase was actually passed by the 4 Dublin local authorities. You're still awaiting the specific criteria. Have you had any further contact from the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government about the specific criteria? I'd ask the same question to DCC, please, if I could. We've made that a priority from my own party's perspective to get an affordable purchase scheme established. And we're still waiting for the criteria to be completed. The €75,000 threshold is problematic. We've had that confirmed today from the Housing Agency and from the original legislation that we're not actually bound to €75,000 for a couple. But I'm just wondering, how close do you feel you are to having a real scheme established where people can actually apply in each of your authority areas? You know, like, what do you see? Is there any planning done with regard to the delivery of affordable housing in each of your areas? Like, what type of numbers are we talking about? I know it's you've limited land banks, both of you. Dunleary, just from a DLR perspective, unless I missed it, there's no mention of how many people are waiting on the social housing list in your administrative area. I see DCC, you have a total of 26,000 families between the housing waiting list and the transfer list, which is a staggering amount of families waiting for housing provision. And I'm just looking to get a picture for what it is in DLR, please, if you wouldn't mind. Finally, two things. Just the implications of not having an affordable scheme to be able to cost your schemes into the future. Like if you take Cherrywood, if you take O'Devany Gardens, where you have 20% affordable, but we don't actually have a scheme fully in place. How have you costed that with the Housing and Finance Agency to be able to go out to tender? Like, have you decided yourselves what the affordability levels are? Have you decided yourselves what subvention will be made, or what equity stake will be taken by the state? So what type of guidance are you being given there? And just, Brendan, just one thing particularly on O'Devany Gardens, on the statement that you put in. Each of them, O'Devany, Oscar Traynor, St Michael's, and you've put a figure behind each of them of 140, 160, 150. Are they the total figures in each of those estates? Like, if you take O'Devany, you have 140. Is that the max? Is that it in that? That's just the affordable. Yeah. So that's not the social and the private. So maybe you could, when you come back in, just clarify the total number in each of those, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thanks. Catherine? Yep. Or Philomena?
I'll just start it off, if that's okay. Just, you asked there about the concern for the demographics going forward, and I'd understand exactly where you're coming from, because it is difficult for a first-time buyer in a county like DLR. Now, I would say to you that I came previously from a place where it was very difficult to get the second-time buyer. Okay. So when people graded up, they graded away from the county. So I don't have a very big concern about a younger cohort of people moving into the county, because I think that the affordable, as we move through it, will get us that the first-time buyers insofar as it can. But it is when people grade up, that is the county that they gravitate towards. So I think that will give us that intermediate band, as it were. We do have one of the highest older populations in the county, and certainly we have people who are in larger homes, and there probably are things that going forward people may choose not necessarily to move from the area. We have brought in a number of schemes where we've had downsizing, specifically around social housing, built very definitely in an area that allows people to move out of a family home and into a smaller, more modern, easier to maintain houses, which also allows those houses to then be given to younger families. So I think there's a number of things that we've done to address it. And Catherine, do you want to take the others?
Okay, just in terms of the LDA is a legal entity as a non-commercial state body, and the proposed legislation will make it a commercial state body. That's my understanding of the situation with the LDA. Yeah. In terms, we have had involvement with the LDA in terms of our Shangana site, and we're working with them at the moment in terms of how that might work and how that transfer might take place. And we have a proposal for a workshop with the councillors next week to update them on our Shangana lands. In terms of the average price quoted there, 527,000, that is the average price in Dunleary right down, but takes into account, obviously it's the market price, takes into account all of the big houses as well. So in terms of providing affordability on our lands, it wouldn't be anywhere near that price. We'll be looking at the cost of building and the operation costs, and then there will be subvention hopefully in terms of the Surface Sites Fund, so it won't be anywhere near the 527,000. That's just a market price. In terms of when we could actually look at having affordable homes, the priority scheme has within it that their advertisement takes place 3 months before the houses or the apartments are ready. So that would be closer to when they're actually being built. So it'll be 3 months before that they're advertised, 3 to 6 months I think before they're advertised. And in terms of the social housing list, we have 4,500 on the social housing list. In reality, though, there's about 1,000 of those households that are on other local authority lists who have expressed a second preference for Dunleary Down. So if you look at actually take them off, you're talking about a region of 3,500 people on the social housing list. And in terms of what we would look at in terms of affordability, our rough guide will be 30-35% of income. That's the way we'd look at it at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
In relation to the Land Development Agency, we've had a lot of interaction with them already, even though they're not fully operational. We're working with them, liaising with them on a number of other state-owned lands in the city. We've asked them to look at a site that we own ourselves in Cherry Orchard, which has significant potential, and they're doing a feasibility on that for the possibility maybe of them developing that for a full-scale cost rental development. So we work very closely with them. In relation to a scheme, ideally, we would like to have a scheme both for cost rental and affordable, but it's not stopping us from progressing. Say in relation to Devon Gardens, while we'll be announcing that scheme, we're still 2 years away from how houses have been built there. And in relation to, like, we see affordability around the 250,000 to 270,000, and we've applied for the Land Service Initiative grant from the department. And if we get that, which we'll be hopeful of, we expect that the 20% will be around that price. Okay. We think that's necessary. It's down to construction and really construction costs. But we think the Devon Garden thing is going to work very well, and we think Oscar Traynor will as well.
And what's the totals, Brendan? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. The total in around Devon Garden has been the region of 700. Okay. 750, maybe 800 for Oscar Traynor, and 500 for St Michael's Estate.
Thank you. Thanks, Brendan.
Owen.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentations. I suppose a number of different questions for both councils. The first is just in terms of the affordable projects that are currently in the pipeline, both the cost rental and the affordable purchase. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a timeline just in terms of where they are at in the pipeline in terms of design, planning, procurement, when expected construction would be, and ultimately when expected tenanting would be? Particularly for those that are the most live, so Enniskerry Road, St Michael's Estate, the Ballymun project, and some of the more recently announced Service Sites Fund projects that you've been approved for. The second question, I suppose, we had a very detailed discussion with the NDFA and the Housing Agency in terms of Enniskerry Road and St Michael's Estate. Obviously, given that Enniskerry Road is the very first in the pilot, and therefore it's an important one. But also St Michael's Estate, because it's such a large project, it's a very, very significant one, which obviously the success is very important, and one this committee has a long record of supporting. And I suppose the big concern that we have, many of us had in the early session, was how we can bring the cost of the rent down. Now, I appreciate that with Enniskerry Road, the rent is set at 1,200 for the entry rent, so I'm not suggesting, although I would like to be able to suggest that there could be a mechanism of bringing it down. But I have a hypothetical question which is relevant then to the question for DCC, which is if we were to bring the cost of Enniskerry Road down from 1,200 to say 900, what would it take? And the Housing Agency were very clear about the peculiarities of the site, and clearly there's not much more that could be done there. And the loan is a 40-year loan, so there's not much more that could be done there. But for example, how much extra service sites fund would it take in that project to bring the entry rents down, say, below 900? Is that something that you looked at any stage, or you have any, I suppose, advice to offer for those of us that are looking at other sites? And in relation to Dublin City Council, the NDFA, in their final comment, made pretty clear to us that if it's a 25-year EIB loan, and if the Service Sites Fund allocation is in the order of what Enniskerry Road has got, you're not getting the rent down below €1,200 a month. He was very straight about that. And clearly his view was the only way you could bring the rent down is a greater portion of capital up front, and or some form of mixed loan finance combining EIB with HFA, maybe having the HFA loans interest only, and then some restructuring of the capital end of the HFA at the end of the 25 years, etc. Obviously, given the huge significance of St Michael's, if we don't get the rents down, that is going to colour people's view of cost rental at a more general level. And this is in no way a criticism of Dublin City Council, because I'm very supportive of the direction the project has gone in. But I suppose if you are here with the Minister or the Department, or if you'd like us to raise these issues with the Minister or the Department, what is it that you need that's different to Enniskerry Road to bring those rents down? I mean, my own view is if we're looking at rent as about a third of your net disposable income, you're looking at entry rents of between 700 and 900 euros. You know, if it's to capture those people above the threshold for social housing eligibility and at the top end of maybe 75 or 80,000 gross household income. So what is it that you need to bring those rents down in terms of service sites fund and or in terms of the structuring of the loan? In terms of the eligibility criteria for the affordable rental, every time I raise it with the department, they seem to suggest that's a matter for the local authorities. Catherine, very clearly you're indicating you're waiting, or your understanding is there's a working group in the department. I know the eligibility criteria is a little way off, but I suppose I'd be interested to hear your views on what you think should be in the eligibility criteria. So, for example, should there be a lower income limit? Though, for example, affordable rental is only eligible for, the only people who are eligible for affordable cost rental are people who aren't entitled to social housing. You know, so, for example, you'd have that bottom line. So, for example, you wouldn't then have social housing tenants in an affordable cost rental unit supplemented by HAP, for example. Is that something you think would or wouldn't be desirable? Likewise, at the top end, do you think 70, 75,000, as it is with the affordable purchase, is the right point, or do you think there's an argument to say move that up to 80 or 85,000? I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. In relation to the affordable purchase, and obviously you've started to get your awards for the affordable purchase service sites fund, there have been some figures, for example, in the Irish Times quoted for Dublin City Council of price ranges of between 116 and 237,000, I think the Irish Times had. Not that that necessarily means that's accurate, but for both local authorities, what are you hoping will be the kind of lower and upper end of the price range? I know that's difficult at this stage and subject to change because of the cost of construction, etc. But I'd be interested to hear what are your hopes or expectations, because obviously we've seen in Ballymun with O'Coolon very significant affordability, and obviously if that could be replicated elsewhere in the city and county, that would be valuable. And then the last is this. Look, we've been talking about affordable cost rental since Alan Kelly's Social Housing Strategy 2020. It was mentioned again in Rebuilding Ireland 3 years ago. There is a lot of frustration in communities in this House, I'm sure among your own departments and staff, at the fact that we're still only talking about a couple of pilots. And while I appreciate that the number of pilots is increasing, it's nowhere close to meet the level of need for affordable purchase or rental accommodation that's out there. I'm sure you're both aware of the ESRI study that talked about maybe 30% of households having affordability problems with their mortgages or their rent, people not eligible for social housing, some spending as much as 40% of their net disposable income. But crucially, the same report identified that in the lower 25% of income earners, 75% of those households are experiencing high housing costs. And these are people who aren't eligible for FIS, aren't eligible for HAP or rent supplement, aren't eligible for medical cards. So having 40% of your net disposable income on housing costs is huge. So given the large volume of need for affordable housing, do you think what's in the pipeline is sufficient? Do you have a read in your own local authority areas as to what would be an efficient scale? And do you think we need, not unlike the Rebuilding Ireland social housing targets, where there's multi-year targets, do you think we need to be moving to those, and have you a sense of what they would be in your own administrative areas?
Catherine?
I suppose in terms of the affordable projects, we're at design. The Enniskerry Road will be at the end of 2021, and that's when the project will be completed. So we could hope to have the affordable or the cost rental around that point. Shangana, we're hoping to be on site in the area of 2021. That will take
2020 or 2021?
2021
yeah.
to be on site, but that will take a number of years to complete. It's a large site, so we're probably talking about 2024 at the earliest. In terms of getting the cost rental down, it's probably a combination of things. I mean, you're talking a greenfield site, maybe rapid bill delivery, a service sites fund increase, lower borrowing rates at the length of time for the borrowing. I suppose we're restricted in a sense that in terms of our own lands, we don't have that much service land. So if we're relying on local authority service land to produce affordability, there is going to be a restriction there. In terms of affordable rental, I suppose if you look at the gross annual income, if you go up as far as 90,000, if you go up at the gross annual income of 90,000, if you look at the net income then at 35% of that income would be in the region of 1,800. So that would be a lot higher than the 12 or 1,300 we're talking about. So probably the 75 is probably more in the line because, and you're right, there is an imbalance between people who qualify for social housing and then that part where they can't afford and then move into affordable. So I'd see the cost rental bridging that gap, yeah.
Brendan?
Thank you. Just on timescales, the first one for us is O'Devny Gardens. We're aiming to announce a selected developer before the end of this month. So that developer will have to go through a consultation process over the coming months with the aim that he would be going to Boyhan by the end of the year. So everything going well, you could have a contractor developer on site by the end of 2020. So that's the timescale there. And as for Trainer Road, it's about 4 or 5 months.
And just the completion then, if they're on site at the end of 2020, completion for roughly?
Completion, if they use rapid build, would be 12 months. Ascot Trainer Road is a few months behind that, and with a selector due to be selected in September. St Michael's Estate, we're finalising a framework plan vision for that area, covering all the physical issues that have to be dealt with, and that will form the brief for the selection of a full design team, hopefully during July, August, so certainly during the summer, which means we have a full design team that starts work straight away. There'll be a strong element of consultation on that, but hopefully again by spring of 2020 that the developer would be submitting an application to Boyhan. In relation to some of the other schemes that were advertised on the market in Cherry Orchard and Ballymun, we're now into the second stage of procurement, and also we just can't give a real indication of start, but we're making progress on those ones. In relation to the cost, all the indications, all the calculations that we're doing on the cost rental is that to be working out at between 1,000 and 1,200 a month, which will be fine for a lot of people, but it certainly won't be affordable for others. So to make that cheaper than that, it will need some kind of intervention. Like even with the Land Service Initiative, it may not be sufficient. So maybe when it comes to borrowing, that we'll borrow over 40 years rather than over 30 years or 25 years. But certainly we need some intervention, bring that down, and we're working on that at the moment. So we're not overly concerned that there isn't a scheme there at the moment, so we're doing a lot of work ourselves on that, and hopefully we'll be in a position to make recommendations to government in the coming months on that. On the eligibility, we'd be keen to see the income limit being a bit higher, maybe a better mix in say in Inchicore or in O'Devny Gardens. So we'd like to see the income a bit up, maybe up to 80, 85, 90,000. The article in the Irish Times, that was in relation, it wasn't information that came from, that was a clarification in relation to issues that some of the developers had expressed interest in. And like the reality is there's no way we're going to build homes in Ballymun for almost 16,000, so it'll be considerably higher than that. Again, it's like the line we were saying earlier, 250,000, 270,000, that people qualify for the National Home Loan. That would be what we were trying to get at. But that was just an indication of market values in the Ballymun area, Cherry Orchard area, and taking 25% off that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very much dictated by the actual cost of construction.
And if that was the cost of construction that you're kind of hearing from the market now, as opposed to in a couple of years' time, what could it look like?
Well, the average cost in the city is expensive. It's around 280,000, but our most recent schemes in Dunor Avenue and Downing Street are between 350,000 and 360,000. So if it's going to be the level of construction going forward, and it may escalate even further from that, it's going to be very difficult to get affordability.
So it's that minus the discount, whatever you get from the Service Sites Fund, would be the sales price, for example, for those units?
If the cost is 360,000 and you get the max land service, that's 50 grand. From that, it's still leaving at 310,000.
Yeah.
Questions, Owen?
Yeah, a couple. So first of all, thank you very much for that. And I know some of these are difficult to answer because they're projects that aren't going to happen for a year or 2 years or 3 years, but I think it's still important that we get a sense of it. Catherine, just to go back to yourself, and maybe it's an unfair question, but specifically with Enniskerry Road, if the price of the entry-level rents of those were to be brought down, right, knowing everything we know about the site, I suppose the only thing that could bring the cost of those units down now would have been additional service sites fund. So I'm trying to get in my head, how much extra capital up front would you have needed to bring it down from the 1,200 to a 900? So instead of, what was it, 4 million, would 8 million or would 12 million, or what would have, because again, if Brendan's problem in certain sites is going to be loans plus service sites fund, we need to try and have a sense of what would make the difference. So like if an extra 4 million wouldn't have really made that much difference, that's important information for us to have. So maybe you haven't worked out those calculations, but if you had a ballpark, that would be kind of helpful. And then I have a couple of questions for Brendan.
Sorry, I think that, I suppose, Jim Bainham, I think, had answered that question earlier. And
he was about to answer it and then withdrew from answering it because he'd worked out rough calculations but didn't want to commit himself on committee.
Myself, but I suppose in terms of the service sites funding for Enniskerry Road, it is already over the 50,000. It is,
yes, significantly over. It's at 80.
Yes. So,
yeah.
To be honest, I haven't actually done that.
Okay.
I don't actually have that.
But it would be fair to say it would be a significant increase to reduce the rents by €300 a month.
It would be,
yeah.
It would be, yeah.
And then just on the rents, because obviously you've a broad category of incomes from in around your 40,000 to up to your 75,000. And obviously the further up that income ladder you go, the more able people are to cope with, say, the 30 or 35%, whereas people would be hovering close to the social housing threshold. 30 or 35% could be quite a large amount. Is there any consideration being given to maybe having several bands of cost rental in a particular development? So in St Michael's, could you have 2 or 3 bands, depending on where you are in the income scheme, that between the 3 of them would cover the full cost recovery, but would be a little bit more equitable? Is that administratively complex? Is that something you're looking at? Likewise, for example, I suppose my one concern, and I know Enniskerry Road is a pilot and it's 50 units, but single people are particularly disadvantaged in the current market. And therefore, if there's no single person units, or if the price range has been done in such a way that's really only accessible to 2-income households, that then excludes a very significant portion of people. So in terms of future cost rental projects, are you looking at a kind of a broader range of household types? And then the final question, and it's the thorny question, I appreciate some of this isn't your responsibility, but those timelines you've just outlined are incredibly long. And again, I know when you work in this, you're kind of maybe accustomed to those, but I think anybody who's in an affordability crisis at the minute and is listening to timelines, as you've kind of outlined there, where 2021, Enniskerry Road is obviously next year, the year after next, but 2024 for Shangana, that's a long, long way away. So what is it that can be done to reduce that timeline? Is there changes that can be made to procurement? Is there changes that can be made to building type? How can we accelerate these projects? And while some of them, like O'Devany, there's probably not a lot you can do at this stage to accelerate. When new projects emerge, are there ways that you could recommend to the committee that we could get the newer projects up and running and delivered much more quickly? Because again, I suppose I go back to the one question that both of you very diplomatically didn't answer, which is, what's your estimation of the level of need versus the very small number of projects in the timeline at the minute, or in the pipeline at the minute? Because if we're delivering very few of these units and we're delivering them exceptionally slowly, that's not good news for all those people out there stuck with unaffordable or unable to access affordable accommodation.
First.
The numbers, like we have 2,000, just over 2,000 units earmarked for affordable housing in the city, and there's probably potential to do more than that. And we have also 1,650 earmarked for cost rental. One of the problems for us will be, as I identified earlier, is that our preference has to be for social housing. We have 17,500 people on the waiting list, and we've only a limited amount of land, so there'll be only certain parts of the city we can do it affordable. So trying to get affordable, cost rental and social will be a challenge. But they're the numbers, and we think there's potential for more than that. In addition to timelines, the timelines are very frustrating, but if you take the O'Devany Gardens, Oscar Traynor projects and some like estates, well, they're major projects. They were only finally approved by the City Council in January of 2017. So that's 2 years ago. And we're now really ready to go select a developer. That's not bad compared to other projects. But the process of public procurement, design, consultation, cost-benefit analysis, all that kind of stuff, it just has to be done. So it's up to us to try and streamline that as much as possible. That's what we're trying to do. Having frameworks in place for design teams and contractors does make a difference. But these projects were only approved in January of 2017. That's not bad for big projects of this nature.
In terms of Shangana, I mean, it is a very large site in terms of the 540 units, but because of that, we have to do an EIAR, and that takes. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that's involved in that between, landscape design, rationales, and all kinds of assessments that we have to do. So I think I said before at this meeting that would take about 9-10 months, and we're nearing the end of that at this point. When all the investigation work is complete, and we have to do the master plan design element now, and then prepare for planning. Now we should go directly to Bord for a site of that size, and that could take 6 months to a year in Bord. Then we have to go to detailed tender stage. So I suppose we're no different than the private sector in these things. We have to do all these things, and we have to have the proper governance in place in those. So that's why it takes that length of time. In terms of the one beds, I take your point in terms of Enniskerry Road, but we will have 1, 2 and 3 beds cost rental in Shangana proposal. And I think it's important to say also that supply brings down affordability, and in Dunleary Down we have 23% of the planning activity in DLR, so that should hopefully bring down the affordable. The cost rental, I suppose the model is based on the costs, and I think previous speakers have said it is based on the tendering process and what those costs come in at, so it is a little bit outside of our control in that sense. So I suppose there are other ways that you could look at cost rental in terms of, like, I know in some countries they do maybe a differential rent type of cost rental scheme, but at the moment the one that we're modelling is cost rental based on the costs.
And just, Brenda, just to go back to yourself in terms of, are you looking at a single rent point or 2 or 3 rent points in terms of St Michael's or other projects was the first bit of the question. And the second question is, I suppose, yes, cost rental is based on the cost, but the issue is over what period of time do you pay that cost down? Because if you try and pay it over 20 years, the impact on the tenant is much more different than if it's over 40 years. So again, I suppose I know a lot of those things aren't things that you control, but given that you're at the front line of delivering the projects, you might have strong views on how that could be improved.
Well, I suppose on Enniskerry Road it's over 40 years, so it's a long period in a sense, and we're still at 1200. So I suppose it is quite complex. And in terms of a single rent or different rents, no, at the moment it's 1200 based on the costs, and there is no difference for different levels of income at the moment. No, I don't know.
For us, all our considerations so far is on one single band. It would be hugely administratively difficult to go down different bands, so we're not considering that option at the moment. Not at the moment.
And then my final question, or sorry, maybe 2 final questions, and again, they're probably more specific to St Michael's. I mean, if we take the Housing Agency's definition of affordability, which is about 1/3 of net disposable income, that would mean for that cohort of people we're talking about, you would need entry rents of somewhere between 700 and 900 euros a month if it was to be 1/3 of the net disposable income of that group of people. I mean, would you share that view? And I suppose, would it be your desire to try and move the rents down into that range, is the first thing. And the second thing is, maybe if you could give us a little bit more detail about the planned consultation with the wider community post the completion of the design team's work, which I presume is sometime around September.
Well, I mean, on the first one, I think we would agree, and I made a point at the very beginning, one of the difficulties we're facing is that even in sites where we're putting in the land, we're confident we can deliver it below a market price, but whether it doesn't really meet our concerns in terms of whether it's affordable. So there are real challenges there, and that's in sites where we have the land. There are sites like the Poolbeg West, which is earmarked for 600, over 600, where we don't own the land, and where we've negotiated to buy the land at well below the market price from NAMA, but it's still a substantial cost, and that's proving very, very difficult. So we're very conscious that the difference between affordable and just below the market price, there's a huge issue there. So, and we will be going back to the Department trying to address how we can make these actually affordable as opposed to just below the market price.
And if we were to be helpful as a committee, because we work on a very collegiate cross-party basis, are there things it would be helpful for us to be emphasising with the department to make that affordable? Because I take it from what you're saying is that 700 to 900 band would be much more in line with what would be affordable. So, I mean, we're quite happy to try and put pressure on the department as a committee to achieve that, subject to us agreeing it in private session. But what would be your key ask? What does the department need to do in pounds, shilling and pence to assist you in bringing the rents down to that level?
As it stands at the moment, some intervention is required from government to bring it down to that level. All the calculations say around 1,200 per month. So to bring it down to 700 to 900, which is what we would like to, is going to need some kind of intervention, some kind of subsidy, and maybe something that works at the moment with the approved housing bodies. We're not sure, but it certainly is going to need some intervention in the normal course of events. And with the construction costs that's there now in Dublin, we're not going to be able to produce it at 700 to 900.
And the details of the public consultation, or what are you thinking?
There'll be loads of consultation. As soon as the master planning team are picked, design team are picked, they'll start consultation straight away. We have a consultative forum already working in Inchicore, which works pretty well. So there'll be no deficit in the consultation during the year, right up to when the master plan is developed.
And my very last question, with your indulgence, Chair. Obviously, there was some political difficulties, shall we say, for the Minister at the launch of St Michael's, which we no need to revisit, but that has created some concern in the local community that those political difficulties might delay or have caused a kind of a cooling in the attitude of Dublin City Council to the project. My understanding is that's not the case, but it would be great to give you the opportunity to put your view. I mean, you're fully committed to this project. It is going to happen subject to all of the legal requirements.
We couldn't comment at all about the political issues, but we're absolutely, totally committed to this project. It's absolutely essential. There's a bad history in relation to this site. We haven't got a great record ourselves in relation to this site. We've got to get it right, and we will get it right. We're absolutely, totally committed to it.
I just have one or two comments. And being parochial as well, where we've come from in the space of 2 years is quite dramatic, especially when it comes to delivery around social housing. And I just want to concur with the remarks made by Senator Boyhan in relation to the staff that are in both local authorities that are here before us. The compassion in which they deal with people is to be commended. And I've had numerous dealings with both local authorities and people in very difficult circumstances, and I would just like it noted and put on the record that the compassion in which the frontline staff deal with people is to be commended, and we really appreciate that. I know sometimes we hear bad stories. I haven't had any experience like that, and I would just like to acknowledge that. In relation to affordable schemes and the complexities that are around that and site-specific. And Brendan, I think you alluded to this before. Like, if you have a very tight site, the cost of construction is going to be much higher than a site like Shangana, which is a vast site and it's flat, but has other complications, as in needs services, road infrastructure, dart station, all the rest. That no two sites are ever the same. So each site, we can talk about having a number of bands. We can talk about having one cost, or that, all the different things that are mentioned. But when it comes down to it, it has to be dealt with on a site-by-site basis, with the complexities, or maybe lack of complexities, that may be involved in that. And in relation to Cherrywood, and I know you mentioned about 300 units, but the council also own a site up there as well. And I would expect that we would be delivering on that site also when the site can be developed at that point. Obviously, there's a phase basis there in order to get to that site. But overall, can I just acknowledge where we have come from in the space of 2 years, that a lot of detail under the water has been done that now we're going to see on top of the water, so to speak. And not a lot of emphasis is put on that level of work that does have to happen before we can actually get to a site. So I do just want to acknowledge that. Frustrating as it is as public reps, how slow it can be for housing to be delivered, we also have to recognise the level of detail and work that goes into actually getting to a site that nobody ever sees. So I just want to acknowledge that. There are really more comments than anything, but in particular comments to the frontline staff that are dealing in very difficult circumstances. Very rarely are they commended, and I think that we should acknowledge their work.
One final question, sorry, apologies. When you mentioned Poolbeg, and obviously the Board Plenary ruling is there, so and that's quite helpful. Could you give us as much information you can about how you hope to deliver the affordability there? Like, there's very significant, not just service sites fund, but additional infrastructural funding that the state is putting into the site. But there's still, I suppose, is a concern that even with that very significant subvention, you're still looking at house prices coming in at quite a high level. So what's your hope or what's your expectation in terms of the discussions with NAMA and the receiver at present?
Our hope is that the LDA will take it and deliver affordable housing. They might be better positioned to. There is a very substantial gap, notwithstanding the fact that there was, LIHA funding and NTA funding towards infrastructure.
Because that's about 30 million or plus, isn't it, for the bridge alone?
Yeah, well, we're talking about 600, which is very large, but so the subsidy per unit is modest enough. But it's a difficult site, even though the land that we purchased from NAMA or are in the process of purchasing for the affordable housing is fully serviced. The nature of the land as a former landfill requires basements. Even if we were to do it with the parking, we still need. So it's going to be it's just going to be very expensive to build those units. In our view, that it's absolutely essential that we have affordable units everywhere, not just on the outskirts. But that's going to pose a financial challenge, and we are in discussions with the department about how we can bridge the gap.
And how does that work? Because obviously the receiver is in control of the site. So the receiver is not obviously going to develop out the site as per the SDZ. So is it the receiver is going to sell portions of the land?
It wasn't possible to do a deal to give effect to the board's decision with the receiver. And in fairness to NAMA took control and have negotiated the sale of the land directly to us, our nominee.
And that's the land which would be, I suppose, attached to the number of affordable and social houses.
Which will accommodate the 600 affordable and I think 150 social. So that land, we're acquiring that land.
Dublin City Council?
Yes. Well, whether we deliver ourselves or whether we deliver through a voluntary agency or through the LDA remains to be decided. But it'll be delivered by a public agency.
In some senses, though, notwithstanding the cost of that does then put you in the driver's seat in terms of control of the site.
Oh, absolutely. We think that's a better option.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just not going to be possible, I think, to get a receiver to deliver on that.
And has that purchase taken place, or is it train, or?
It's in train.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies.
Can I thank you for attending today? And as always, with this meeting, we always go well over because there is such a level of detail involved in this. But can I thank you very much for your attendance today? This meeting is now adjourned. The next meeting of the committee will be this Thursday, the 20th of June at 9:30 on the detailed scrutiny of local government water pollution amendment bill and the social housing bill. Thank you.